OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
Very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM. It's Ger Gilroy and Eoin Sheahan with you every morning from 7:30 all the way through until 10 o'clock. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We're talking about the second and last episode of the Lance Armstrong documentary with Floyd Landis, who of course plays a starring role in the downfall of Lance Armstrong. That's coming your way around about 8:45 today. After that, we're going to speak with Ardal O'Hanlon, who's putting Deadwood into the OTB Culture Hall of Fame with Now TV. And before that, we'll bring you right up to date on everything else that's happening in the world of sport. Eoin Sheahan, good morning to you.
Good morning. How are things?
Good, yeah. Sorry, I should have said we've got some Paul Rouse goodness coming your way to inject some intellect into your brains. It's very early in the morning to be doing that, but it's the right thing to do. On my way in this morning, Eoin, I saw a pretty horrific sight. There was a dead pigeon on the side of the road, just outside the office here on Diggs Lane, and there was a giant seagull pecking away at the carcass of the dead pigeon, which was still bloody, so obviously it was relatively recent. By the time I got my phone out, a car came along and scared off the seagull. And I was trying to work out some analogy where us talking about Lance Armstrong is either the dead pigeon or are we the seagull picking on the carcass of the Lance Armstrong story. But my brain's just not working enough to do it.
Maybe we're the car.
Maybe we're
the car who comes and scares away Lance, who is a seagull and has become a white bird in his old age, as opposed to the pigeon that he used to be. He is picking away on his own bloodied carcass on the cobblestone floor of South Dublin. We are the car coming along to scare it away, analyse the seagull for a while, and then scare it away.
Maybe that's exactly it. And maybe that is exactly it. We get into this a little bit with Floyd Landis about whether or not this is something we should talk about again. So I'm going to save that. I'm going to park that conversation for a little bit later on. We were talking briefly about, before we came on here, about we're in this kind of weird spot now where I think there's about a week left until essentially racing starts, and then 2.5 weeks left until football starts. But when football starts, it's going to be like a non-stop World Cup for 9 weeks, and then there's a 2-week hiatus, and then football restarts again. So we're in this like peak, we're literally entering peak football, which is going to be bizarre. It's going to be on every night at different kickoff times, and then all day Saturday and all day Sunday there are going to be games. All of it on TV, all the time. And it's gone from having no sport to look at to perhaps, dare I say it, a little bit too much.
And who knows what's going to happen in the 9 weeks in terms of other sports resuming. In that 9 weeks, we're going to have a bit of rugby. Who knows what's going to happen with the GEA if things with figures and COVID-19 in this country get better, if they bring something forward. There will be more golf. I dare say it, Ger, but things are going to look a lot more normal for sports fans in those 9 weeks. If you've got anything to do, anything to watch, anything to binge, anything to read, you've only got 2 weeks to get it done, folks. Anybody who's been thinking that this opportunity, or that it was an opportunity, that having no sport for a couple of months, that you got to do other things with your life, that you got to spend time with other pieces of entertainment or other pieces of culture, or whatever it was, gardening, cooking, now is the time to do it, because in 2 weeks? Is that what you said? Once the Premier League resumes, that is it. Everything else is out the window because there is so much. There is a glut coming your way.
How do you feel about that glut, Eoin?
I feel that the glut will be utterly consumed for week one. I feel that beyond that, it will just become a situation where, I forgot Wolves are playing Watford tonight or whatever it is. I forgot that Liverpool were playing out the season against Sheffield United. No, there might be relegation points on offer and things like that. But I would say that we will begin to focus on less and less of these games as the weeks go by. There will be a novelty at the start that Premier League exists. And look at the quiet Bundesliga thing where you can hear everybody shout and scream on the pitch. Look at that now, but instead we can hear people doing this in English. That novelty will exist at the start. We'll have the novelty of Liverpool winning the Premier League in an empty stadium at the start. And we just have to hope that the slow bike race that became the top 5 race before things stopped entirely, we just have to hope that bike race gets even slower and slower, and those teams in and around the middle third of the table are still as mediocre or as inconsistent at least as they were before the break, and that Manchester United are dropping points, Arsenal are dropping points, Chelsea and Spurs are dropping points, and that Wolves, for example, don't actually just race away from them, or Manchester City don't have their ban overturned, because then really you're in a bit of trouble where you're like, okay, now we move on to part 3 of this, which is relegation. And how much can you G yourself up to watch reams and reams of relegation content? The relegation race works well when you kind of half know the score and you're turning on Match of the Day. Is it going to work as well when it is suddenly our meat and drink?
Especially when
time will tell. Maybe it will.
Over a full 90 minutes. We'll see. Right, Ardal O'Hanlon, Floyd Landis. We're going to talk Lance Armstrong. Going to bring in sports news from Sheahan, Hannon, and that's all coming up as soon as we get to this, which is the latest episode in Paul Rouse's History of Sport series. Here he is talking to Joe last night. Have a look.
Now we're continuing our sport and history series. We have with us once again Paul Rouse, professor at UCD's School of History. Paul, how you doing? You're very welcome.
Thanks a million, Joe.
Last time around, we talked about sport during the war years, effectively, and we're moving beyond that now. We're into 1922 and beyond, and we're focusing largely on Ireland. So if we're talking 1922 and Ireland and beyond and sport, then this is where we start talking about partition.
We're looking at what happens to a sport and to sport in general and to sports people and to people who love sport when they live on an island which is partitioned in two. That is to say that they're under the settlement of the Anglo-Irish Treaty. There was the establishment of the Irish Free State, and that Free State was up and running by early January 1922. At the same time, 6 northeastern counties of Ireland remain or become part of what is now called the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And this is, previous to this, sport had been organised on an all-island basis. And the question now would be, what would happen to sport in this new political dispensation?
And I don't suppose that Michael Collins and his team over in Westminster discussed sport at any great length. Are there any provisions for how sport should run in the country in the treaty?
No, it's not. This is something that is how sport is affected by political events over which sports people have no control. It is not something that's considered. It's not relevant to the discussion. So
and that presumably is why we have different sports handling this in different ways. There wasn't a roadmap.
There is no roadmap. There is no overarching solution. There is no, and what happened with each sport depended on the peculiarities of that sport. It's the legacy of its history before 1922 and the decisions made by individual administrators as to how they would act and then react to events and circumstances as they changed over the coming years.
Has that held us back in any great way as a sporting nation, do you feel?
Oh, I think there's no doubt that the partition, you look, for example, at what has happened to soccer and the manner in which there are 2 leagues on the island is a great example of the manner in which what could be a much more competitive, much more, I suppose, interesting league if it was one United Ireland Soccer League. And really, domestic soccer in Ireland, it requires it requires the capacity to transcend the border if it's to develop its potential, even on its own terms, let alone with European competition. That's in the first instance. Second of all, there are, for many decades, there was such a split in athletics, such a split in cycling. Proved really impossible to field teams, and there were, in some cases, no teams fielded at all. Such were the level of disputes that took place. And then even within the GAA, the fact of the political border was a manifestation of the divides within wider Irish society, as in an all-Ireland society. And it emphasised the extent to which the GAA was something that was given to belonging to the nationalist section of Irish life rather than unionists.
So let's jump through these different sports then in various aspects of sport across this period. The Tailteann Games, I know you want to talk to us about. The state established the Tailteann Games. I vaguely know what these are, and generally they only come up in brief conversations with yourself. So the Tailteann Games, these were a big deal. These were huge in their day. When did these start? What was the point? What was the motivation behind them?
So it's, if you look at the countries or the states that have been formed in the last 20, 30 years, for example, after the fall of the Iron Curtain and the fact that Yugoslavia split into different states, one of the first things all of those states did was to form international sporting teams to represent those new states and to compete in the Soccer World Cup, for example. You can see what it meant to Croatia back in France in '98 to go as far as they did, and so on across various sporting organisations and across the world. And what the Irish state did, the new Irish Free State, as an attempt to establish its legitimacy and to proclaim to the wider world that this was an independent state now in existence, was it hit on this idea of forming, establishing and running what were called the Tailteann Games. Now, the Tailteann Games, when they eventually took place in 1924, were bigger than the 1924 Paris Olympics in terms of the number of people who competed in them and the number of spectators who were drawn to the events. The events in the Tailteann Games were competed for by Irish people born in Ireland or by members of the Irish diaspora who came to represent teams from South Africa and Argentina and America and Scotland, Wales, England, and so on. So this was a coming home of the tribes to celebrate Irish independence. The sports that they competed in were really interesting. There were competitions in hurling and football with teams drawn from around the world. There was a golf competition for men and for women, tennis competitions similarly, and athletics competitions, basically the program of Olympic athletics competitions. There was clay pigeon shooting, lawn bowling, and interestingly enough, there were airplane races, which began in the Phoenix Park. I'll come back and talk about those as well. And we'll talk also about the fact that soccer and rugby were excluded, and so were cricket and hockey, and they were political statements, and they're related to the origins of this idea. So where did the idea come from? The idea came right out of the playbook of Irish nationalism. And it was said that the original Tailteann Games had lasted from 632 BC until 1168 AD, and that they were to celebrate the life of Queen Tailteann. They were her funeral games, and Queen Tailteann being one of the great kind of goddesses of Irish history. And the 1168 is the finishing date. That's to say that it was the following year, 1169, that the English first came. So this was to say now in 1922, initially, we survived these 800 odd years of colonization and conquest. Our civilization triumphs, and we are going to celebrate the fact of our survival by reviving these games. Now, the idea of revival had first come to pass in the 1880s. It was something that was promoted by people like Michael Davitt, the Land League leader, and the GEA had gotten behind it at that stage. But bringing it back in 1922 was a cabinet minister called J.J. Walsh. J.J. Walsh had first come to prominence as a leading member of Cork GEA in the 1910s. He was in the GPO, where he fought for the Irish Volunteers in 1916. And he was later, as a cabinet minister, the man who most famously had the post boxes in Ireland turned from red to green. He got all the post boxes painted green, and he was the man who was the founding cabinet minister, the driving force behind the establishment of 2RN, the national radio station, in 1926. But it was Walsh who, in 1922, less than a month after the Irish Free State was formed, who said, "We're going to do this. We're going to hold this Olympiad, this Irish Olympiad, and we're going to draw people from around the world, and we're going to film it, and we're going to send cine-reel footage everywhere to say what we're going to do." So he got money out of the Department of Finance to fund this, including £10,000, a huge sum at the time, which was given to the GEA to redevelop Croke Park in order that it could host the opening and closing ceremony and the athletic events. And he worked at it assiduously with his committee, using the model of the Olympic Games through 1922, through those early months of 22, through the spring and into the early summer, until there was a disaster. The dispute within the Irish nationalists who had fought for independence, which had led to civil war, flared out into the open in June 23. But still Walsh reserved. There may be street shooting in Dublin. The GPO may be in flames, but still we will continue. We are going to hold these games. finally the idea died in July 22 when the American team said, listen, we're not coming. This is not feasible for us to do this. So they were deferred until after the Civil War, and it was August 1924, before it was possible to stage these games.
It sounds like an extraordinary success if in their first effort they had more numbers than the Paris Games.
Yeah, it's what they did was really clever. I said earlier that it was competition between Irish people and the Irish diaspora community, and it was that. But the organisers, JJ Walsh, he was sensible enough to understand that they needed a little bit of stardust thrown in it. So they contacted the American team who were coming back from the Paris Olympics, got them to stop in Cove, put them on a train, got them to come to Dublin. So the diver Reeve Richmond, the high jumper Harold Osborne, and the swimmer Johnny Weissmuller were involved, and this got a huge amount of both local and international attention. Actually, the story of Weissmuller had won the Olympic 100-meter gold medal for swimming in the Olympic Games in Paris, and he most famously later went on to act as Tarzan for many years. He was the first Tarzan in Hollywood who became hugely famous at that. When he competed, he won gold in the Tailteann Games in swimming as well. But the finals for those Tailteann Games swimming competitions were held in the pond in Dublin Zoo. And I think there's something wonderful about the idea of Tarzan winning gold in swimming past the monkeys in Dublin Zoo. So it's this idea, though, that you bring stardust in, and you don't just, it's a celebration of Irishness, and you cleave to Irish sports, and you exclude those foreign sports of rugby and soccer. But at the same time, what were the most popular competitions? The most popular competitions were the motorcycle races, which were dominated by riders who crossed the border and came down from Ulster, where motorcycle racing was already established as a hugely popular sport. And the most popular of all, the airplane racing. So these new planes bought by the Irish Free State Air Force ran a competition in which they took off in the Phoenix Park, and they raced at 3 points. They took off, they went by the Wellington Monument, they went out to Clondalkin and turned at the tower, and they went over the Hellfire Club in the Dublin Mountains and raced back. And this was just an enormous spectacle in a world where a whole lot of people, were seeing planes close up for the first time. And just to add a little bit of a luster to it, they built a mock castle in the corner of the Phoenix Park out of wood. And in that wood, they put anti-aircraft gunfire, which they set up these mock bullets, which made a crackling noise when you fired them, to protect them from these planes who were coming back. And the planes bombed that mock castle using plaster of Paris bombs as a sort of spectacle. And this again got huge publicity for these games.
So well received, no criticism. This was just a thorough success.
Absolute criticism from loads of people, as there always is criticism of everything that anybody does. They get criticized for it. So the view was that, what are we doing? Loads of the GPO hasn't been rebuilt. There is rubble still around the main streets of Dublin. There's been a strike, so there's rubbish everywhere on the streets. There's an electric strike, so there's candlelight in all the hotels. What are we doing having a sporting spectacle when there is so much left to be done here? Mm-hmm. And then there was the usual sneering. There were so many competitions that it seemed to be relatively difficult not to win a medal in the Tailteann Games. So there were cartoons in the papers about the various categories at which you could get a medal for. This was the ultimate sport for all in 1924. And of course, behind it all lurks the politics of it. This was an event which was utterly associated with the new Free State, and that means with the Cumann-na-Nail government. So therefore, those anti-treaty forces did not accept it. They did not wish for it. They did not want to have any sort of a part to it.
Okay. So how many times did this happen then, the Tailteann Games? How many games did we have?
24 was a huge success. 24 was a huge success. 28 was less successful, still a success, but not too bad. But Fianna Fáil are in power by 32. It's too late to cancel the game, so they let them run a little bit. And then Eamon De Valera killed the games. And he essentially killed him by that grand master stroke of putting together an interdepartmental government committee. And that interdepartmental committee reported in 1935, then 1936, and it was too late by 36 to put them together for these things. So they were essentially killed by stealth. J.J. Walsh was appalled. He just thought, so many people have given so much to this, and you just kill them because it's not your thing. It's too much associated with what happened before. So,
and is it that simple? Dev came along and said, "You pro-treaty types came up with this idea, therefore I don't like it."
Inevitably, it wasn't presented as being that simple, but ultimately that's how it was done. This is the year zero of the new revolution, is Fianna Fáil in power in the early 30s. But it should be said, by the way,
we could be closing down on the 100th year anniversary.
We could be doing that, but we could also there was a shift in focus, and there was the idea that instead of the mere Tailteann Games, that what we would look for would be to stage the Olympic Games. So there was the plan that we would stage the Olympics, or we would look to stage the Olympics in 1940. But where we didn't get that. Tokyo were awarded the games, and the idea of Ireland then, or a city, would be Dublin staging the games, just fell away.
Okay. So let's talk other sports then in the midst of partition. Soccer is the obvious one, given that we have the IFA and the FAI. How quickly did that happen? Is this acrimonious from the first moment of partition, or is it a seamless enough thing? How did all this go?
Oh, it wasn't seamless. This was just nicely bitter from the very beginning. And it was actually before 22 that the split happened. The split was happening from just around through that decade of revolution between 1913 to 1921. Soccer was being pulled apart. The national team had been really successful in 1913, but there were no international matches from 1914 onwards. And after the outbreak of the Great War, it was no longer possible to play a national football league. So there were the Irish Football League disbanded, and what you were left with by 1919 were cup competitions. So the Irish Cup, what we now know as the IFA Cup or the FAI Cup, was restarted in 1919, and in 1919, it became a huge point of controversy between people who ran the game north and south. There was a semi-final in that competition between Glenavon from Lurgan, not too far from Belfast, and Shelburne from Dublin. And the first game of the semi-final, the match was a draw, and it was played in Belfast. And by precedent at this stage, the second leg, the replay, should have been played in Dublin. But the IFA, under presumed pressure from Glenavon, decided no, the second leg would be played in Dublin as well, and Shells refused to play, and there was a huge dispute. So this signalled that there was a split coming between Leinster and Ulster, and it was serious. And what happened in 1921 was there was a meeting of the Leinster Football Association in the early summer of 1921, and they decided that they were seceding from the Irish Football Association. They would no longer recognise its writ, and they would run their own competitions. That they were not going to be ruled from Belfast, where the Irish Football Association was based. So they were just simply not having it. This was going to be it, and they decided at a meeting. First of all, so it was the 8th of June 1921 when they decided to set up their own league, and it was 8 Dublin clubs that were in that league, and those people then came together on the 2nd of September 1921. So the centenary of the Football Association of Ireland is next year, and it's the 2nd of September 1921. They decide to form a separate body, and that year, from that autumn of 21, before even the Free State is up and running, there is a separate football competition. The there's a southern version of the IFA Cup.
Right.
And by early 22, so in late March and early April 1922, or in April 1922, the IFA Cup and the FAI Cup finals are played within a week of each other in the spring of that. And this is the symbolic moment where they're different.
So are you telling me potentially if when Collins went over and if he'd come back with 32 counties, no partition, there was still a split in Irish football, north and south?
There was a split which would not have been of the same nature
Yeah.
Because of the fact that administration would have been based along the borders, but there were already huge disputes between North and South. This had been going for a while. At a Leinster, they used to play interprovincial soccer matches between each other in the same way as happened in rugby. And at the match in 1919, one of the Northern players was attacked in Dublin after the game, and this fueled more tensions. There were teams stoned by rival supporters north and south. And in the north as well, there were running battles with gunfire being shot between Belfast Celtic and Linfield, for example, and so on around the city. So soccer was really divided. And initially, Belfast Celtic and other clubs professed their allegiance to the Football Association of Ireland, or the Football Association of the Irish Free State, as it was from the very beginning. And
how quickly did the two associations settle down into something resembling what we have today, and a good or a reasonable working relationship?
Well, they didn't play each other in an international match until 1978. So that tells you that this was a long time in the coming. But so you look at it two ways.
And sorry, first of all, would they never have been allowed to be drawn together in a World Cup qualifier or a European qualifier?
Well, we'll come back to the domestic stuff. Let's look at what happened with the international team. So first of all, what happened was almost immediately, and this doesn't feed into soccer's narrative that it had no place in independent Ireland. It was pushed to the margins. Of course, it was poorly treated in certain schools and in certain places, and there were difficulties there. But immediately, or almost immediately, the Football Association of the Irish Free State was accorded recognition by the government as the governing body for soccer on the island. And what they did was they set about establishing an international team. And they looked for recognition from the International Football Association Board, that body based in London, and they were denied it because it said you can't have an island where you have two representative bodies claiming control over both of them, and they were basically rejected from that. So then they applied to FIFA. FIFA had been established was only 20 years old at that stage. So FIFA, and they had designs to stage a soccer competition at the 1924 Paris Olympics, which they duly did. So the Football Association of the Irish Free State, under the imprimatur of the government, fielded a team in that competition. Now that team, because of the nature of the Olympics at the time, did not include any of the best Irish players who were all playing professionally. It had to be just amateur players who were playing in the country. But field they did, and they beat Bulgaria in their first match before losing. But before they went out, they were kind of entreated. These were the representatives of the state going out, and a newspaper Sport said at the time, for these players, their uppermost and inseparable thought must be their country. Their country expects them to do their duty, to play as Irishmen, to win as Irishmen, and if the worst comes to the worst, to lose as Irishmen, fighting unflinchingly to the last. So this was a team going out to be emblematic of the nation. But of course, this was a nation that did not have its symbols worked out at this stage. It wasn't clear, and wouldn't be clear until the end of the 1920s, what the national anthem was. So they took the anthem that they used was Thomas Moore's "Let Erin Remember," a less than well, you wouldn't describe it as stirring. The jersey they wore was blue. They wore a blue jersey with a spray of shamrock on it, and this was not competing in the Paris Olympics. Was not the start of a glorious, for a glorious kind of set of sequences over the years. For over the rest of the 20s, they played an average of one game a year, and that was it. And it was only in the 30s when they began to enter World Cup qualifying campaigns in 34 and 38 that they began to get a regular series of matches. But there's something fundamentally fascinating that was happening at the time. Both the Irish, both the team called Ireland that represented the Free State, and the team called Ireland that represented the 6 counties, both of those teams claimed to be called Ireland, and both claimed jurisdiction to pick all the players on the island that they so wished. So between 1922 and 1950, more than 40 players represented both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as they became known, but both were called Ireland at the same time. It was utterly farcical at certain times. Johnny Carey, the great Man United captain and one of the greatest soccer players that Ireland has ever produced, actually played for both teams within a space of 3 days of each other, having captained both of them. This is thing, and it was only after 1950 when it became clear that Northern Ireland were now going to, or what became known as Northern Ireland, were going to enter World Cup qualifying competitions, that the split was made, brokered by FIFA, that you must pick from either side of the border, not from both.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.
The OTB Brief. Everything you need to know about sport every morning. Need to get on top of the day's sports news? Well, the OTB Brief is the only sports update you'll need every morning. With all the breaking stories, post-match reaction.
They had one more day to rest. We were really in trouble to build the team.
And the best bits from off the ball, all in a 10-minute podcast.
Oh, sweaty palms. Of course, you guys know what it's like, but that was nervy, yeah.
The OTB Brief, online every morning from 7 a.m. on offtheball.com, the Go Loud app, and everywhere you get your podcasts.
OTB AM.
Yeah, very good morning to you. Welcome along to OTB AM. If you've just joined us, you missed some great stuff from Paul Rice talking with Joe Malloy last night on the history of sport. They're not quite at modern day just yet, but they're getting there all the way up to the 20s at this point, and it's been a brilliant series all the way back to the 1600s. If you haven't actually subscribed to it yet, then do yourself a favour and get on to the OTB Podcast Network. And the best place to get the OTB Podcast Network is in our shiny new app, which is now in the App Store, available on Google Play. Or you've got an iPhone, Owen, do you? What do you call it? It's the App Store, is it? Is it something?
Oh, I'm Android as well, so I'm
okay.
Google Play all the way.
Yeah, well, the app is now available. Search OTB Sports app and download it and mess around with it, because it's full of good stuff.
It really is. You definitely want to mess around with that brand new app, as you say. Available. Are you excited about this? Is this a big moment for you? Is this like your latest birth of a child, Ger?
I've got 3 children. I understand that it's a lifetime commitment that you make when you have a child. So I hope this is a bit easier than parenting. That's what I would say.
Well, you're not looking after the tech end of things. I don't think people are expecting that. So you basically get all the good things of being a parent of this app.
It's a shared thing, Owen. OTB is very proud of this. So this is the best place to listen to OTB AM. You can watch all of our videos. You can listen to our 40-odd, 50-odd podcasts. All that good written stuff that we're doing as well is all combined in one nice, tasty little package for you. And there'll be live scores whenever there are actually matches to talk about, which is coming very soon. Live sport is nearly upon us again, Owen. We should talk about this. We talked about it briefly a little bit earlier on, but for people who are coming through, I don't think everybody's quite prepared for the orgy of football that is coming our way.
I wouldn't describe it like that, to be quite honest with you. I think that would be kind of an overpowering sort of sense of football happening in front of you. People still have the choice to do this. Let's not forget to actually engage in what is going to happen on the screens in front of them. That engagement will lessen over the weeks, as tends to happen with every Premier. Like I think with every Premier League season, the first weekend is huge. The next couple of weekends are pretty big. Champions League kicks off. That's always very big. And then you get to run up to Christmas, and that really gives a new stretch of energy to it. But usually come February or March, I would say that people tend to lose their interest in the league. But you could almost say that the coronavirus break came at the perfect time, because all of a sudden that time when people started to lose interest in the league was taken away from them, and all of a sudden it feels like a brand new season. So you have the excitement of a first day again. You've got a great early fixture in Arsenal against Manchester City to get things underway. And I think there genuinely will be a lot of people excited to have football that we care about again back on their screens. Like the Bundesliga, it's not something that we all care about unless people have connections to the country or connections to the team. That being said, a lot of people who support Premier League teams don't exactly have connections to the team. They've just generally been growing up loving that particular team through their parents or whatever. But no, I think that's there's something correct what you're saying, that there's going to be a lot, but it's an optional thing. It's pay-per-view to a point. It's something that you don't have to actually engage with, and I think many people will probably get sick of it before it reaches its conclusion.
Yeah, well, there's going to be every single game is going to be on TV, and there's going to be a lot of different kickoff times. So we'll talk a bit more about that a little bit later on. In the meantime, Sheahan Hannon is with us at 8:05 this morning on OTB AM. So good morning, Shane. How are you?
Not too bad, lads. An orgy of sport is one way of putting it. I hadn't quite thought of it that way, but that gets the excitement going, I guess.
whatever you're into, Shane. Any port in a storm. New rules, obviously, where everybody's allowed to be intimate again with one person.
Indeed. But the point Eoin mentioned at the top of I kind of disregarded that in my head, that we'll be able to actually understand what the players are saying on the pitch. That adds an extra dimension of interest. You'll have the volume up full, I think, just to make sure you can hear what the players are saying, because there could be some quite interesting conversations. I've always wondered what they say anyway in the downtime, so that'll be interesting.
Yeah. My favourite moment is going to be for when they're actually walking off the pitch with their hands over their mouth and we can actually hear what they're saying anyway. It's like, I smashed you on Fortnite there last night, or whatever classy trash talk that tends to happen between Premier League players.
What have you got for Shane?
Yeah, a few decent bits going on this morning, lads. We'll kick off with soccer. Premier League teams will have the chance to play games in the next 2 weeks in order to tune up for the competition's restart, which of course is on June the 17th. The league will permit clubs to play friendlies against championship opposition under strictly controlled conditions. Social distancing restrictions and hygiene measures will be in place, and referees will not take charge of those games. Meanwhile, Bundesliga news this morning as well. Leipzig coach Julian Nagelsmann admits Liverpool target Timo Werner is likely to leave the club this summer. The German attacker has a €60 million release clause and has long been linked with the soon-to-be Premier League champions. Nagelsmann says he can do nothing more in his attempts to keep the player at the club. American sociologist Dr. Harry Edwards says Colin Kaepernick is the most significant athlete of his generation, as people across the world show their solidarity with George Floyd by taking a knee in opposition to the systemic racism that cost him his life. Sociologist Dr. Edwards spoke to Off the Ball last night about the influence of Kaepernick. The former NFL quarterback lost his livelihood for choosing to publicly protest the unlawful murder and mistreatment of black people by America's police force back in 2016. Some really interesting thoughts from Dr. Harry Edwards on last night's show. You can read about them in full on OTBsports.com this morning, and indeed on the new OTB Sports app, as Ger mentioned. Manchester City will speak to Phil Foden about his responsibilities after the midfielder was filmed playing football with members of the public on a beach. The youngster was videoed and also photographed disregarding social distancing guidelines on Sunday. Foden was with his family on Formby Beach on Merseyside. A date in early November has been set for Russia's appeal against their 4-year sporting events ban at the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The suspension was handed down after the Russian anti-doping agency was found to be non-compliant by WADA last year. It blocks Russian athletes from competing under their own flag at the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and also bans Russia from hosting or bidding for major sporting events for a 4-year period. In rugby, David Humphreys says it felt the right time to step away after 6 years as Gloucester's director of rugby. The former Ireland out half believes it's best to clear the way for the Premiership club to have a clean start with their next head coach. Formula One boss Chase Carey has confirmed that a positive COVID-19 test by a driver would not result in a Grand Prix being postponed. He says if a driver were to contract the virus, then his team would have the option to use a reserve driver. The delayed Formula One campaign will get underway with back-to-back races in Austria next month in July. And finally for me this morning, lads, some racing news. Stradivarius and Anthony Van Dyke will clash in Friday's Coronation Cup at Newmarket. Along with Anthony Van Dyke, trainer Aidan O'Brien will also saddle Broome, while last year's winner Defoe is back to defend his crown for Roger Varian. Stradivarius is using the race as a warm-up for another tilt at the Gold Cup at Royal Ascot. Frankie Dettori won on his return to horse racing yesterday. Meanwhile, the legendary jockey rode Galsworthy to victory at Kempton.
All right, good stuff, Shane. Thanks very much for that. Shane bringing you up to date on everything that's going on. You get more of that good stuff over on the brand new OTB Sports app and on OTBsports.com. Right, time for the papers.
OTB AM.
On OTBsports.com this morning, Colin Kaepernick is the most significant athlete of his era. That's Dr. Harry Edwards. He's been on the show a couple of times now. First time I was around talking about O.J. Simpson, and he's actually in the O.J. documentary, one of the best contributors in that, and that's saying something because it was an amazing documentary series. And he actually worked with the 49ers as well for a period of time, so he'd know Kaepernick. And is unbelievably well qualified to speak about this, having been at the forefront of the civil rights movement all the way back to the 1960s. So a brilliant contribution on the show last night and talking about Kaepernick and how he just was really ahead of his time. And, you know, the continuing blackball of him and the end of his career, it will forever be a stain on the NFL. It'll take a generation to fumigate the White House after Donald Trump. That's more from Harry Edwards. I finally met a man who carried rubble from the Rising to Croke Park. That was the story that we were talking about a little bit earlier on in the show, and Paul Rouse, we replayed his interview from last night. Odi Nagalo wants to help Manchester United move higher and higher after extending stay. I am surprised that Odion Ighalo, if the stories were true about the 72 million contract that was awaiting him in China, so how much extra is he getting for the next 5 months to stay in England? And Cricket Ireland await nod from 2 governments to get ready for England. A one-day international against England is up in the air at the moment. That's OTBsports.com.
The Irish Independent this morning leads with a photograph of Conor Bradley, the young Tyrone man who was first brought to the attention of Liverpool. Says that there was always signs that he had what it takes to make it to the very top. So come his 17th birthday on July the 9th, Bradley is set to sign a 3-year professional deal after a successful season on a scholarships contract at Anfield. The main story then here on the back of the Irish Independent is that United boss takes aim at restart relegation rebels. Ed Woodward not happy with the fact that some people don't want relegation to be a part of the new Premier League restart, which is obviously a totally fair point. I mean, the exam has been cancelled, but the exam is back on. You have to sit the exam, relegation-threatened clubs. Like, it would just be a farce beyond a farce if relegation were not to be a thing, and Liverpool had the opportunity to actually lift the Premier League trophy. And Chelsea joined Reds in race to land Germany striker Werner. Chelsea plotting a move to try and snatch RB Leipzig striker Timo Werner from under the noses of Liverpool. He's 24 years old now. He's going to cost £53 million at the moment. That is his current release clause. In a year's time, it'll be £36 million. So it could be a situation where they just wait for another year, but Werner is keen to go to Anfield ahead of Stamford Bridge, it is thought.
The Irish Times this morning has a picture of Drew Wiley. Wiley finds real meaning of team working on the front line. He's a radiographer at the Mater Hospital. Sorry, it's Ryan Wiley, who turned 26 the day the lockdown came in, and that's a picture of him there in action against Mayo last year in the Allianz Football League. And top 14 shelved, but clubs expect to complete Euro ties. So the French teams are expected to be able to compete in the remaining European rugby, which is great news for the Heineken Cup. But the top 14 has officially been finalised, and there's a Sean Moran column there as well. Reardon has a piece on the Aer Lingus College Football Classic, which they hope will be rescheduled between Navy and Notre Dame for 2022. There's obviously a fixture in place. It's Nebraska-Illinois for next year, but they're saying that it would be about 40,000 Americans coming to certainly the Navy-Notre Dame game, and it would have been a boost of about 80 million quid for the economy. So the tourism industry could really do with that.
The Irish Examiner this morning leads with this story from the FAI. FAI must reform to access state funding. Good detail in this from John Fallon this morning. Shane Ross really keen to have the full overhaul in terms of term limits and all the new initiatives that were to be implemented this year. He wants them in place by July. Of course, there's been some logistical problems with actually organising that. They need to have an AGM or an EGM, and they're looking at potential venues to get that done. It is July 26th is the date for that. You've obviously got a lockdown restriction being lifted less than a week before that, so potentially there could be a physical conference organised with social distancing, but it seems like a tricky situation for the FAI at the moment to try and implement a lot of what was agreed earlier in the year, the Memorandum of Understanding, before the middle of July. Of course, what could happen is if there's a new government formed and there is a new sports minister, there could be a situation there where they go a little bit easier on the FAI, but right now it is still Shane Ross's gig, and he is still very much pushing for reform, as the headline suggests there. Also here in the Irish Examiner, Ighalo delighted to continue United Dream, as you've mentioned. There's something about how their faces glow out of it that makes it great. Meanwhile, this is Waterford and Mount Sion legends Larry Coleman and Frankie Walsh. They're pictured on the front of the Irish Examiner. Clubs meet to discuss RFU plans for return, meanwhile. And so who should return to play first, club or county, asks John Fogarty.
And look, it's obviously a big debate. I mean, things are moving very quickly. 3 weeks ago, you would have said that we weren't going to see anything before September, October. Now, all of a sudden, it looks like a lot of club teams are training in 3s and 4s around the country, and you would expect some kind of diktat that's going to be tolerated on pitches sooner rather than later. There's now talk that they're going to open the walkways around GAA pitches, and again, that very conservative calendar that was laid out a couple of months back, that's probably going to change, right?
You'd imagine so, pretty soon. And I don't think there's going to be anybody out blaming the GEA if they do actually come forward and change it. I think it's even hard to be totally angry with. I can see where people are coming from in terms of opening walkways and perhaps opening the pitches for a bit of socially distant action and all that sort of thing. But the GEA have clearly outlined their reasons, and while there is no prospect of social distancing being reduced, they don't feel comfortable in having their grounds open for games, and it seems not even for a puck around or a kick around. So they've clearly laid out their reasoning for it, in my opinion, and I think it's been fair enough. The thing is that everybody else is now looking at their businesses, for example, things that have cash flow issues, that they need to open their businesses early. The GEA don't suffer from the same thing. So perhaps we're judging the GEA by the wider societal thing, which is people are now in a hurry to get things back up and running. And I'm sure the GEA will probably go along with that pretty soon as well. That would be my hunch.
The London Times this morning has a picture of Jack Grealish on the back. He's in a two-page spread with Henry Winter, talking about his lockdown shame, how he wants to stay up for Dean Smith, and also Ron Smith, Dean Smith's father, passed away, and so they're like, we want to do it for him, and also about how he actually enjoys playing in front of the hatred of fans. Somebody obviously who has had a lot of it in his time and has dealt quite well with that part of it, better than he dealt with the lockdown, certainly early on. Rugby a step closer as Stars back training. Professional rugby was given the green light to return to training today, but some players may not be back in their clubs for 2 weeks, and the season is not expected to resume until the middle of August. So the middle of August seems to be a key kick-off point for all of rugby, and maybe the final quarter of the year is going to be a lot of top quality rugby and maybe some international rugby as well. There's stories about Australia wanting everybody to come there as well, and then Joe Root wants chants from the England Supporters Club. The Barmy Army played over the public address system when Test cricket returns behind closed doors in July. It sounds ridiculous and it sounds like it's a terrible idea, but then you think about it for more than a minute and you go, is it that bad an idea? Take some crowd noise. This entertainment that we're spending time with, let's make it as good as possible.
Yeah, anything to make it better for people at home as well. Give the illusion that it's actually real. The Mirror this morning, afraid for their lives is the headline. Newcastle star DeAndre Yedlin reveals a shock message exposing family fears. This is DeAndre Yedlin, who was born in the United States, has revealed his family would fear for my life as a young black man if he lived in the USA, born in Seattle, so speaks with decent context. And Neda Manua is playing his trade in the United States at the moment with Real Salt Lake City. He is scared US cops could shoot him if he steps out of line. And they've both been on the record chatting about their fears with everything that's been happening in the United States over the last couple of days. A couple of other things here in the back of the Mirror. Frankie Jettori as fast in a mask. Gobsmacked stars warned to stop spitting. And oh no, Foden, City star breaks rules with beach kickabout. You can kind of feel everybody losing a bit of enthusiasm with these footballers breaking lockdown rules headlines.
Yes, you can.
I really do. I'm sorry, I do not care one bit about Phil Foden on the beach with his pals playing football at this point.
Yeah.
Maybe I should.
It's hard to muster the same level of or even outrage at this stage. Although, there are still some people who are still outraged by everything. So I say I salute the ability to continue to be outraged after months and months of continuous outrage. That is an amazing ability. Is it like is it like a shot in the arm that they take? Is there a particular aspect of their diet that allows anger to fester for so long? What is your secret to being an angry person? Get in touch. I think it's a virus, isn't that it? Isn't the virus rage, according to the movie? And 28 days later, the virus was rage that killed everybody. 20 minutes past 8 this morning here on OTBAM, the Irish Daily Star headlines for you. We'll party in style. Klopp title bash will be worth the wait. So that's Jurgen Klopp saying, it'll be grand and socially distanced for now, and then we'll have a proper one eventually. And Yedlin reveals fear. That's DeAndre Yedlin. That's the same story that you were talking about there. And FAI board united on package. The board of the FAI remained united last night behind the steps taken in January to secure the 35 million rescue package from the government, UEFA and Bank of Ireland. So that FAI story is rumbling along nicely in the background here. There doesn't seem to be any end in sight to it's not like the new broom has come in, swept everything clean, and away we go. It's a unified board. There is rancour there, as there is in all of the Irish sports organisations at one stage or another.
Yeah, definitely. And that is the main story on the back of the Irish Daily Mail. It's not, sorry, on the back of the Irish Daily Mail. Sorry, back of the Irish Daily Mail is not just going with that. It's going with Premier League, £35 million a week. £35 million a week would not be a bad cash injection for the FAI. That is what top flight clubs must refund TV firms if there are further restart delays. So that is the bill if Project Restart does not actually get up and running and isn't as big a success as they're hoping it will be. Frankie a winner, and so is his wife. That's Frankie Dettori, masked with a winner yesterday. Morton Missive kicks the FAI while it's down. That is their FAI story in the Irish Daily Mail. And Dyche angry with Burnley over contracts crisis.
The Irish Sun, their back page, is squaring up to racism. And FA are OK with players taking a stand during games. So this is Blackout Tuesday yesterday. Lewis Hamilton says he's overcome with rage at the brutal killing of George Floyd in the United States. And perfect fan Michael Fennelly has been humbled by support after quietly hanging up his boots last month. Only 35, the manager of Offaly, obviously, and said he was very grateful for all the kind messages and comments he's been speaking yesterday. So the FA, FIFA, Gianni Infantino actually said that players should be applauded for taking a knee in FIFA football matches as opposed to being booked for it. So we'll see what happens when. I mean, obviously Jadon Sancho isn't going to be sanctioned, you would assume, for revealing a message on his shirt.
Like it's kind of mad we're having this conversation, isn't it? Yeah. Like I've got the Guardian up next, and Jonathan Liu's got a piece in it that the George Floyd death is too important to be hijacked by corporate sports insincerity. And it's not only insincerity that he's talking about here, but it is also about a double standard if you want to broaden the parameters to, say, NFL and their view on Colin Kaepernick to NFL publishing something in support of Black Lives Matter over the last couple of days, that there is a bit of a conflict there. And like just even on the main story here in the back of the Guardian, FA pledges common sense approach to racism protests. Jacob Steinberg here, like using language, obviously nothing to do with Steinberg here, but whoever wherever is getting information in the FA, Steinberg is writing that it's unlikely that the FA is going to punish players who take a knee. Like according to this newspaper, it's not a definite that they're going to punish players, or that they're not going to punish players who take a knee or who protest. And like similarly the way you're talking there about Jadon Sancho, which is that the DFB are unlikely to take action against Jadon Sancho. Like, do we not want to actually have some sort of definite commitment to players here that if they do protest, then they will not be punished? Because it does feel like a little bit of lip service to say, great, we support the players and all that, but we won't actually support you if push comes to shove, and we actually need to qualify this as some sort of political statement that we can't stand over, because that is not supporting your players. Well, you can put up your Black Lives Matter social media post, but actually follow through and give these players a totally free pass.
Yeah, right. What happens when you have a player from a different country and culture who is protesting against sanctions for racism? So somebody in support of racist chanting, for example, or somebody who complains about their country's national team having to play behind closed doors because there were racist chanting. Like, at what point? I understand that this is a significant moment where everybody needs to get behind what's happening in terms of protest and to properly tackle institutional racism, which exists everywhere. And we should be having that conversation. But if you give free rein to everybody to say what they want, then all of a sudden you start having white supremacy signs being flashed, and that's a protest. That's Maria free speech. For our radio listeners, I was doing inverted commas on that, just in case anybody thinks I actually think that's true. Like, what do you do in those circumstances? Does the players' union come out and say, well, you said this was okay, but why is this not okay? One is clearly racist, and they are completely different things, but you know that an equivalence will be drawn. It's completely false, but you just know that there will be fairly horrific viewpoints out there amongst the playing population in various leagues right across the world who might take this as an opportunity. If someone flashes a Nazi salute and says, well, I'm just protesting, like, then that's why those were introduced in the first place, essentially.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I don't see any issue with a football league coming to the fore and saying this is our stance on racism.
Fair enough. I agree.
That if you come out and say, and you're Jadon Sancho with a Black Lives Matter, Justice for George Floyd T-shirt, that is fine. If you come out saying I support the KKK, that is not fine. It's you can clearly make a very defined stance on something here, but also just obviously I'm being facetious there and being ridiculously OTT. But what if there was some under the surface racism that existed within certain leagues, and if that bubbled to the fore as a result of people being able to express themselves politically, at least that's out in the open then. Is it the inherent racism, the invisible racism that is almost more insidious than the racism that's actually at the top level because you can't see it and it is more institutionalized? I don't know, again, there's a little bit of being OTT there as well, but I certainly would have no issue with a league saying we will support you in your Black Lives Matter protest of any description, of any sports league.
Yeah, look, I think they should actually be openly supporting it, but then it becomes corporatised, and that's, I guess, the whole point of Johnny Lee's piece today. 26 minutes past 8, I'll give you the Telegraph headline. Woodward takes aim at restart rebels. This is Manchester United Executive Vice Chairman Ed Woodward urged Premier League chief executives to accept that relegation was an inevitability for 3 clubs if the league was to fulfil its obligations as part of Project Restart. Premier League gives go-ahead stage friendlies, so they're going to happen, and Frankie Dettori back in a mask and back in the winner's enclosure. FA vows there will be no punishment for taking a knee, so they are saying that there'll be no punishment for taking a knee. That's the Telegraph for you this morning.
The Irish News then, finally for me, jubilant Dettori slots back into the groove at Kempton, and McShane says best is yet to come from Schlottneil. This is their hurling manager, Michael McShane, who says the best is yet to come from his team and that their eyes are firmly set on winning a historic All-Ireland club title. We haven't been able to say this for a while, but the Racing Post, Frankie's back. A brilliant picture of Frankie Dettori on a black background. Lester Piggott rode until he was 59. F it, I'm going to give that a go. The riding superstar returned with a winner yesterday and is hungrier than ever. It's a 2-page spread with Frankie Dettori, and then their back page is a preview of the match between Werder Bremen and Eintracht Frankfurt tonight. So it feels like it's just a normal Wednesday for the Racing Post, and it's big and chunky, and it's good to see it actually back on newsstands, because when a lot of media organisations have stopped publishing or gone to fewer hours, a lot of them don't manage to actually come back. But the Racing Post, channeling their inner Michael Jordan, released their 2-word press release. We're back a little bit earlier on this week and delighted to see that. So what are we at? 27 minutes past 8 this morning here. We are very excited to tell you about the OTB Sports app, which is now available to download in the App Store or the Google Play Store. If you're watching on OTB AM right now, if you listen to any of our podcasts, if you enjoy any of our videos on YouTube, or indeed if you tune into any of the shows, the OTB Sports app is going to be something you're going to really enjoy. It is a home for everything that we do here in OTB. Featured articles, sports news, live scores, over 40 podcasts per week, all of our videos and our 24/7 sports radio station. You can read, watch or listen in to everything from OTB in one single place. Just search for OTB Sports, download, and away you go. And remember to rate us, and if you've got any feedback for us, feedback@otbsports.com is the email address. Feedback@otbsports.com is the email address if you want to give us any thoughts on that. Now we're going to look back at the ESPN Lance Armstrong documentary next here on OTB AM. But first, let's hear a little bit from Dr. Harry Edwards. He joined Joe in last night's Off the Ball to talk about the George Floyd murder and why it has sparked so much unrest in the US. A reminder, the best place to listen to this piece is our podcast network over at otbsports.com and the OTB Sports app.
Why do you think this has captured the mood right across America this time? Because we've, the incidents like the George Floyd death have happened far too often over, even the intervening decade since the LA riots of '92. So you've given a few reasons just there as to why you think it's caught the mood.
Well, there's also this. This was a lynching caught on television at prime time with a man literally begging for his life as he was asphyxiated to death by a white cop with his knee on this man's neck. That was dramatic. It was profoundly disturbing, and it occurs against a background where people have a lot of built-up anxiety, where they have a lot of built-up tension as a consequence of the pandemic and the incompetent, criminal way that the president and his administration has handled this problem from outright denial to, in point of fact, exacerbating the situation by refusing to take action that could have been taken to slow it down. And so all of that anxiety is there, and then the American people are sitting there in their homes, literally consigned to their homes, asked to stay home and stay safe. And this is what comes over the airwaves, over the cable networks, into their homes. And even though it was just one man, it's part of a long history and pattern of police action against the black community. 147 black men, women, and children killed every year since 1968 by the police, most of those men, women, and children unarmed. And this is as opposed to 40 black men, women, and children being lynched a year from 1882 to 1968. So we're now, under cover of the badge, murdering more black men, women, and children in this country than were lynched each year going back to 1882.
Dr. Harry Edwards there speaking with Joe Malloy on the show last night. He's a brilliant contributor and really manages to distill things down into its simplest form, even very complicated issues like what's happening in the United States at the moment. So well worth your time to listen to that. And as I said, an absolutely brilliant contributor. If you want to get in touch with us this morning, you can WhatsApp us. 0879 180 180 is the number. Now, we are talking about the Lance Armstrong documentary, and I don't know, Owen, you thought the first episode was rubbish and the second episode was much better. Is that a fair summation?
Yeah, I think it is. Like the second episode is longer, so it gives you far more scope to actually cover a few more things. I don't know, I felt that the first one was far more unintentionally funny than the second episode, so I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. I don't think if something is unintentionally funny, it ever is kind of a mark of a successful documentary, really. But part two, probably less so, covered a few more serious topics. We delved into a little bit more of the character of Lance Armstrong. We know the things that he did as a doper. We sometimes don't appreciate just how much of a tyrant he was, or just how much of a bully he was. I still don't think it goes anywhere near far enough to actually expose that. And I think what we have is a parting shot of him in tears about Jan Ullrich and about the double standard that he believes exists when it comes to judging cyclists that have doped. As in, Jan Ullrich got screwed over, Lance Armstrong got screwed over, George Hincapie didn't. And according to Lance Armstrong, or certainly it's insinuated from him, that their crimes were similarly egregious and that they should be treated the same.
Yeah, look, it's such a weird scenario where you know so much about the Armstrong career from having talked about it on the show for 18 years essentially at this point, and it feels like people are going to come away from this. It's impossible not to think this guy is absolutely weird. He's just, it's a weird ability to lie to himself and to ignore all the stuff that he did and come out the other side, but also at the same time make some good points, has insane levels of charisma, and the way that the Livestrong and the Foundation are held up in this documentary over the two parts of it are like it's this unbelievable force for good in the history of American cancer patients' experience. There are lots of questions about the Foundation. Loads of questions have been raised at various stages, and his relationship with the Foundation, which don't even get mentioned. There wasn't even one dissenting voice, really. They were like, oh, look, he absolutely was completely sincere in why he got involved in it in the first place. Towards the end, maybe things changed, but there's no, that rock is left there, and all the stuff that's wriggling underneath the rock are left. The Emma O'Reilly relationship, Emma O'Reilly forgives him. I would have very liked to have seen that in itself is pretty interesting, and they didn't go into that at all. So I don't know.
The why she forgave him.
Yeah, and so she forgave him in 2016. So here we are 4 years later. You know, what's the sense around that? And look, again, it's interesting. You know, we had to record Floyd yesterday. He's in the States. So he said his interview actually happened a couple of years back. So again, you know, this all seems to move quite a bit, and it has been a moving story. I guess it's the end of the deal that they cut to kill the story of the lawsuit, and that being the end of things, essentially. There are no more Lance Armstrong stories coming out. There are no more investigations into him. He's never going to reveal any more than he's previously revealed. So this was about the rehabilitation of his public image, and you know, he's so close to being completely redeemed in the eyes of enough people for it not to matter.
For sure. Like, I think that's a really good point, and we'll get into this with Floyd as well very shortly indeed. But if you are to believe that we still don't have everything about Lance Armstrong, I think that's a very, very good case, that a very strong case that is the case. I think that you have to just wonder, why is he still holding things back? And it's pretty obvious. We've started to see things trickle back to normality for Lance Armstrong, or trickle back to some level of him being accepted in society again. Like the last couple of slides on the entire series, when it shows Where Are You Now, features Lance Armstrong getting welcomed back into the sports broadcasting world, for example. Not only does he have his own podcast, which is really successful, NBC Sports employ him as a pundit, which is an important thing for Zenovich to have put up at the end, I feel, because you can make your own mind up about this, but the question is always, why is he perhaps still not giving the full truth? This is exactly why, because he is getting paid to give his opinions on cycling once again. He will get more money as time goes by, as people maybe watch this documentary, get blown away by this documentary, and start to believe the Armstrong lie once again.
Yeah. And if you look at it, loads of sports have... Christophe Basson didn't come up in this, but he was one of the early people who kind of was like, oh, this is a bit suspicious, and ended up being bullied by Armstrong. But when he was re-releasing his book a couple of years back, he was wondering why someone like Laurent Jalabert has a role on French television, despite the fact he has a history himself with doping. And the point is that people don't care. When you're watching TV for entertainment, you don't care if that guy is the best broadcaster to enliven the hour of highlights that you have every night for 21 days during the Tour de France, and it's Lance Armstrong. You're like, yeah, I know that guy. What's his name? Yeah, that he was on the Wheaties box, or yeah, he got the yellow arm. Yeah, he cured cancer, whatever. Then people don't care. All they care about is like the 15 seconds that they're tuned in, and is this going to be the best entertainment I can get? So, if you were NBC, wouldn't you hire him if you were an executive there? Like, how do I make the American population vaguely interested in the Tour de France when there are no American riders who are any good? And like, this all seems like a mat. How do I even explain the tactics? We've got like the biggest bully in the history of the sport available to come on and explain to us. Like, it's a win-win-win for everybody, except the sport.
I'm not sure you do employ him, to be honest with you. I think that there is levels of this. It's Lance Armstrong wants us to believe that everything is black and white at this point, because that suits his narrative. Like, if everything is black and white, then everybody who took a cortisone injection is therefore on Lance Armstrong's level, which is so obviously not the case. There is so many grey areas here if we want to consider that doping is rife in cycling, and Lance Armstrong pushed the boat out to its very limit. He is the worst of the worst of the stories that we know. He is the worst doper in the history of the sport. Therefore, he should not be welcomed in before people who, I don't know, the cortisone injections, or even people, to be honest with you, part of US Postal, who were under the thumb, who were doing blood bags, who were doing EPO. For me, they're nowhere near the level of Lance Armstrong. The stuff he said about Emma O'Reilly, the way he psychologically bullied his teammates.
He apologised. He apologised for that, though. That's the thing. Like, at some point, you do actually have to believe in sin and redemption. And we do have a society where you go to prison and you pay your debts to society.
Well, can I just on that, Ger, just one question on that. How can you believe in sin and redemption if we are now going to listen to Floyd Landis tell us that there is still so much that Lance is not telling us in terms of the truth? For sin and redemption, you need to come out with the full truth.
That's a key point, right? Just to go back to when you said he was the worst of the dopers, he would maintain he was just the best of the dopers, and that like he's at the front of the field, but the field is the field, and he just happened to win that race anyway. And I think that so my prediction is, and I'm not saying I agree with this, my prediction is that he is going to be a key part of TV coverage, and the main TV coverage of the Tour de France sooner rather than later. And I expect audiences to accept very quickly that this is good for the coverage. Here's the guy wearing the black hat. He's the very impressive Texan coming on with his big opinions and dropping criticism on loads of people because you're going to watch it. I think it's going to be more interesting to watch that broadcast than watching somebody who, you know, a lot of people won't know. Certainly, I think that's how the TV executives are going to do it. And maybe that's the whole point of this, is to get him rehabilitated to a point where he can do that and no one bats an eyelid. And we're probably getting close enough to that point. One of the reviews I read about this was, finally we can stop talking about all this stuff. And I feel that way a good bit. I feel like this might be the last time that I speak about this. This might be the last person I interview ever, or get involved in an interview with about this. That's what I feel, that I've had enough of this now.
It also doesn't help that you've just watched an hour and 50 minutes of Lance in one sitting. Like, that's probably informing your view a little bit on this week. If you talk about gluttony of football in a couple of weeks, like, I mean, it's gluttony of Lance over the last 10 days or thereabouts. So I'm not sure. I could see you getting an enthusiasm for Lance again in 6 months' time. I wouldn't wave the white flag on Lance just yet.
Hold me to my word, will you? Hold me to my word. I have one last thing that I want to say. We're going to go late just for 30 seconds on this. A lot of people were talking about the doping. His son is obviously an offensive lineman at college. And a lot of people were like, you know, would you recommend your son dope? Was essentially the question. I'm paraphrasing there, and he's like, no, not now. Like, you know, maybe when you get to the NFL, like, and there's shock and outrage, I think, a lot of people about that. Like, I think his point about the peloton persists on that. But for me, the worst part about that was not knowing his son's number.
Yeah.
That was the most shocking part. It was like, you're supposed to have a relationship with his kids. You don't know what number he plays in. You got his number wrong in front of everybody. You're there. You don't know the rallying cry of the team that you're giving a talk to. You're completely underprepared for the talk. Like, this is your chance to really help your son with his thing that he's doing, and you get his number wrong, and you don't know. It's like the level of self-aggrandizing, being a bit of an a-hole, that's off the charts.
Or is it just a lack of sharpness? I don't know. Like, even when you see him running at the end, like, he doesn't look, I know age is a terrible thing, but like, he doesn't look like the supreme athlete he once was, even though he's like doing all these triathlons and things like that. He seems like a shell of the Lance Armstrong that was lying his way to Tour de France titles.
Are you body shaming Lance Armstrong there at the end?
Not body shaming whatsoever. I would kill for Lance Armstrong's body. But no, I'd take that back.
Your copy quiz time starts with I would kill for Lance Armstrong's body. I take that back. Right, it is 8:42 this morning here on OTB AM. Irish actor and comedian Ardal O'Hanlon is still to come this morning on the OTB Culture Hall of Fame. First, though, we're delighted to say yesterday afternoon we caught up with Floyd Landis for a feature interview. The convicted doper and 2006 Tour de France winner is one of the most important characters in the Lance Armstrong story. Enjoy. All right, I'm delighted to say we've got Floyd Landis with us to talk about the second episode in the new Lance Armstrong documentary series, which has been airing on ESPN over the last couple of weeks. Floyd, thanks a million for taking the time to talk to us, first off.
Yeah, man, good to chat with you guys again.
Tell me, what's that whole process like of actually being in a documentary and waiting for it to come out to see, well, how much are they using my stuff and how have I been portrayed in this?
Yeah, that's the thing. I didn't. So it was a long process. I don't know exactly what Marina was her name that produced it. I don't know what her initial goal was as far as timing for making it, but I did the interview probably, man, it must have been 2 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. Not 3, but it was a while. And initially she reached out, and I figured, I mean, there was a time when I was, if ESPN said they were doing something on Lance, I would say, no, I pretty much can figure out what this is going to be like. But not that there's not a problem with ESPN, but generally Lance had, you know, some kind of control over what his editorial content looked like. But in this case, I was a little more optimistic that, you know, they were going to just try to tell the real story. Because at that point, all the facts were out there, right? Lance had a case yet, but I mean, everything else that was meaningful or material to the story was already sort of known. And I'd hoped at some point, you know, if I shouldn't say I'd hope, but I mean, I figured if somebody wanted to tell the story properly, it was going to be hours worth of video, right? This is a fairly complicated story and complex, at least. So I agreed to do it just because I figured, I'd been through enough negative press anyway. What's a little more if that's going to just be about making Lance look good? But initially when I met her, she was pretty impressed with Lance. She had just come from, she had come over from Aspen to Leadville, which is probably a 3-hour drive, and she had just been at Lance's house, and I think that was the first time she'd interviewed him for that. And I was when I talked to her about her experience with him, I was a little bit worried because she seemed kind of, impressed with his charisma and his ability to kind of, tell his side of the story. But at the end of the day, I think it came out pretty objective. I mean, it's a difficult story to tell, right? There's a lot of people involved, and there's a lot of just, even with every single character, even including Lance, there's some parts on both sides of the fence, right? Because he was mean to everybody, but he also was in some senses a victim of the whole system to begin with. So I sat down with her for, I don't know, it must have been 3 or 4 hours, which is a lot of content. So you never know what a part of that's going to get used. But all things considered, I think it was all right. I mean, it's hard for me to know. I know it was produced for a population that isn't necessarily obsessed with cycling or probably doesn't know most of the people in it or the details. So there's a lot to tell there that isn't really interesting to me or you or people that obsess over cycling to begin with, right? But I think all in all, it was well done. I mean, there's more to it, but it's hard to. Nobody wants to watch 20 hours of that, right?
Yeah, I couldn't make up my mind if this is the last conversation I'm ever going to have about Lance Armstrong, or if this is going to set me off on another deep dive. That's the bit that I'm kind of have I is this it now? Have I had enough? So there's a lot riding on this. There's definitely a lot riding on this flight. From that kind of perspective of the objectivity of it and whether or not it was worthwhile yet, I'm still uncertain because. So we had Tyler Hamilton on last week, and we'd had him on about 18 months ago as well. And the first time he was on, he was like, look, if cycling or indeed any sport wants to recover from a situation like it found itself in, everybody needs to sit around the table and say, I took this drug, I got it here, it cost me this much money, it had this impact on me, and this is how my program worked. And this is the program that I would do now if I was doping, so that we can all begin to find out how it works. And you need to have everybody telling the truth for that. And I still feel like Lance is saying he didn't dope until, he only took certain amounts of drugs very early on in his career as opposed to taking everything, even though I think Julian McClure has somebody on the record saying he was taking loads of stuff. And also he claims he didn't dope when he came back. And yet there's I don't know, was it the Recent Report or somewhere along the way, there's a piece of evidence that suggests it's like a 1 in a million chance that he wasn't doping when he came back. So I don't feel like we quite got the full truth.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and I 100% agree that if you're going to make any positive impact with, as far as changing the system or changing the opportunities that young cyclists have, then you got to all be honest, and you have to. But in order to do that, you have to be in a position where everybody's got sort of the same free pass to speak openly too. And as far as Lance goes, he's still. I don't know what he's holding on to, but he's got his idea of what he wants his public image to be, and so he's got an incentive to hold on to that. I mean, I think I'm just guessing here because I haven't talked to the guy in 10 years, but I think he still holds on to a real. I mean, he really cares that people know that he was a great athlete, notwithstanding drugs, whatever else went on, being an asshole to people. And I think people know that. I mean, I don't think anybody discounts that. I don't think there's anyone out there that thinks that, just an average cyclist, a cyclist of average talent, I should say, could take the drugs he took and win the Tour de France 7 times. There's a lot more to it than that, and he deserves credit for that. And I don't think anyone's discounting that. But from my point of view, I think that's what he's holding on to. Like, look, I came back and I raced clean and I still got third and I was 40, old, 45 years old, whatever it was. But I don't know what value it has. But for some reason, I'm with you. He's holding on to something that probably doesn't really matter. And it would be more beneficial for everyone if everyone just told the truth. Not just him too, but Johan. I mean, look, Johan's an articulate guy. I actually enjoyed his kind of parts of it. I wish he would. And he says he did. I don't really know what he told the investigation that the UCI had, which I don't think anybody has any faith that the UCI would do anything with any information anyway. So he may have, but you're right. If everyone doesn't tell the truth, then you can't really get to a point where you can start over. And I mean, look, I don't know. I know you guys have a fairly jaded opinion on things just like I do, but I don't think anything's changed, frankly. That's the sad thing for me, is that we didn't take the opportunity we had here to try to figure out a solution. Part of it's the fault of the athletes for not wanting to really be forthcoming, and part of it's the fault of the anti-doping agencies for not really understanding how to get people to tell the truth, right? You can't offer a reduced sentence. You got to offer a free pass. There is no reduced sentence. It's all about public humiliation. No one cares about the 1 year off. They care about the fact that they'll never be able to talk about anything for the rest of their life except drugs. It's binary. That's the problem.
There's a lot in there, Floyd, from, you mentioned Sky, you mentioned the UCI, the anti-doping agencies, which we'll all get to. But just on the theory of what Lance is trying to achieve here, it seems to me that part of him is definitely trying to get reintroduced to society in some level. I don't know what that level is or what he wants that to be. But certainly it seemed to me that once Oprah was done, he felt that was it. That was the nuclear bomb, as he puts it in the documentary. And everything from that point was him saving his image, or him at least looking to have his image recovered in some shape or form. And for further truth to then come out, Oprah would probably not help to that end.
Yeah, I mean, he comes right out and says that he doesn't want that back, and he is in some sense glad that it happened. But then on the other hand, he's still extraordinarily mad at me for causing it. So I'm probably more on the side of the fence with you that he wants some of that back. And look, I don't fault him I don't think anyone faults him for that. He had a great life, and if you enjoy that kind of attention and energy around you with all these people that love you, then it's hard to not have that when you did once have it. And to some extent, I don't think I'm alone. I think most people would forgive him and say, look, he deserves to have some say. And because the guy's he has a real story to tell, and it's probably got some good, morals to it, but it's got to come with a new Lance, right? And he doesn't want to do that. He wants to be his old, obstinate self, and whatever. I mean, you can respect that as the character in the story. I guess it's respectful. He's just the most defiant asshole on earth. But at this point, we're all grown up, man. Let's figure this out. And I don't know, man. He's an interesting guy.
Why doesn't he like you so much? What like the vitriol towards you is fairly intense. Anybody who's even done a brief look at the details knows why he might have not been too happy with you in the first place. But why is it you that is the name that is held up by Lance Armstrong as the person he particularly dislikes right now?
Well, I think in his mind, and we will never know if he's right or not. In his mind, if I hadn't done that, then everything would still be the same. But again, that can't be reconciled with the statement that he's glad it happened and it made him a better person. Like he's got to pick a storyline that makes sense, and it just doesn't.
Like that was his nuclear bomb that he talks about. He said he needed that. I assume
that's what he meant. Yeah, I think that's what he meant. But and so I think it's directed at me as I'm the reason that it all came down. I mean, there was a bunch of other reasons that just one little twist of fate and it would have come down anyway, but it didn't. And so here I am, and I'm the guy to blame. And if you need someone to blame, I mean, I guess if you just want to look at it in a vacuum, then yeah, great, you can blame me, but it doesn't solve anything. And being that angry for that long, I mean, frankly, it's impressive. Like, I don't know if I could stay that angry for that long at anyone.
If they had let you come back and join the team when you were coming back from your ban, would you have reached the point of frustration that you reached and sent the emails that blew the whistle?
Probably not. I mean, someone asked me that yesterday, and I hadn't thought about it in a long time. And they asked it more in the context of, well, you shouldn't be, put on a pedestal here as some guy that did anything good, because you probably wouldn't have said anything. And I didn't. That's not what I was trying to do anyway. I don't want to be on a pedestal. Frankly, I'd rather just never talk about it again. I'm with you. But I mean, the fact is that when it happened, and it is purely coincidental, like I wasn't really even thinking about it at the time, but all it would have taken was another probably 6 months, and the statute of limitations on everything, on the legal cases, on all of it would have run. I mean, I think I've filed that lawsuit within maybe a month of the statute of limitations running out on the last event that would have applied to it. So probably not. I mean, there wouldn't have been any cause for bringing a grand jury investigation. Statute would have run on that. WADA, of course, makes shit the fuck up as they go. So who knows what the statute of limitations was on that. But the only reason that WADA got any information in the first place was because the federal government leveraged it out of people. So I think it's safe to say that, if he had done that, enough time would have passed and it wouldn't have been nearly as catastrophic at the very least.
So I think that bit, it's his hubris, and I wasn't really sure that how much of an asshole he came across in the second part of the documentary, because he is so charming. That's the thing.
Yeah, he's good.
Really good. Like, that's the bit that actually I am continuously fascinated by. The bit where he's like, "Oh, it's really bad. I was in full attack mode." It's like, poor Lance, he had to go in attack mode against poor Emma. His life he ruined. Oh, it's an amazing. It's a gift that I don't know where that gift comes from. It's probably weakness in us.
He's very, very good, man. He does have some very, very impressive skills. And look, I want to believe that inside him somewhere there's an empathetic person, and he's just an intense guy. But I really don't know, because part of his concern for Ulrich's well-being is a result of the unfairness as it applies to him. So it's hard to know really where he really comes from.
That was very interesting, that very last monologue of the documentary, where he starts to point out the double standards that exist around the world in cycling within various countries. Do you go along with that at all?
I mean, it's undeniable. If you just look at, and to this day, it continues. I mean, I hate to just fixate on Sky and the Chris Froome thing, but they provided absolutely zero justification for it and went against their own rules and just said, that's all you're getting. I mean, that's not, there's absolutely no excuse for what happened there other than just politics. And if you're going to have politics involved in it, then you don't get to say we're making things fair and play politics at the same time. Those two can't be accomplished at the same time.
It's that hypocrisy, I think, which has always informed anybody who gets caught. It's the sense that it's unfair that I'm getting caught and being singled out. I don't know if you remember, there was a Tour de France rider who won the polka dot jersey, Gert Gilroy, in the 80s, maybe early 90s. And he wouldn't smile for the whole tour, even though he was winning stage after stage in the polka dot jersey. It's because he'd been isolated and had been banned. It might have been a 3-month ban, because that was how much of a ban you would have got back in those days. And it was the injustice that was preventing him from celebrating. At least that's how it was reported on the TV coverage that we were watching as kids. And that always struck me as a bit weird. Like, and it seems like that. It seemed like the hypocrisy was the anger that drove you as well, that you were being singled out, despite the fact that you were coming from the US Postal Team, where you knew just how much the doping was going on.
Yeah, it's so. man, there's so many layers to this just this stupidity of it all. But Vaughters, let's use Jonathan Vaughters. He's a great example of hypocrisy to begin with. So he's got it on his bio and his Twitter account. It says he's dedicated his life to anti-doping. I mean, I don't even know where to begin with that. So
There's, again, as a, can I play devil's advocate for a minute on Bouters, right? Because I'm interested in this. Like, is there a template there? If you take yourself out of the situation, and I know it's really hard to do, but is there a template there for somebody who was on the inside to become a whistleblower and to be, I don't know if it's accommodated in the sport or to find a future? Like, should we have room for another Bouters to come along from a team that may or may not be doping now, but who would come and publish chapter and verse? What would their future be?
So, yeah, I'm not sure. I think right now it's through and through so thoroughly just kind of inequitable on every level that there isn't a way for anybody on either side, even in the anti-doping agencies, there isn't really a way for them to do anything positive. I mean, you even have effectively whistleblowers from inside there. You have some people who have left the anti-doping agencies and just say, you know what, fuck it, this isn't even worth it. So I don't know, and I don't look when I use those guys as an example, or Chris Froome or anything else. I don't know Chris Froome, and I don't have any hard feelings towards him at all. I don't even honestly care if he's doping. He's stuck in the same situation that we were in, and that's a result of what we went through, having had no effect on anything. Which I mean, at the end of the day, what really bothers me is, they nearly killed a couple of us, and not that we're innocent or didn't deserve it, depending on your point of view, but they went to that extreme and didn't actually. And so I don't know where the role should be, or how you tell if someone's contrite or honest going forward. That's why every once in a while I just come to the conclusion, and I've said it before, that it might be best to just allow it. Like if your goal is really to make it fair, which is just another stupid philosophical conversation because that's not a thing anyway. But if that's your goal, is to make it as fair as you can, right now, given the tools you have and given the situation, if you have two working brain cells, you can only conclude that it has to be allowed. Just let it happen.
It then obviously becomes some variation of Formula One, where the best constructors win, the best doctors win. But you're right, it is literally.
That's what it is. That's what it is now. I mean, and the worst part now is you have to pretend that it's not.
The attitude to protect the sport seems to be the most ingrained defensive operation that you see, and it goes all the way back to Armstrong. I guess it goes back to the people before that who might have been at risk of being caught too. You always wonder, like, why is this? And I guess they touched on this a little bit in the documentary, where I can't remember who it was. It might have been Tyler was talking about. Hein Verbruggen would be on the phone. Lance would ring him up and complain about something, and the proximity and the closeness of that relationship. I think it would have been good to tease that out a bit more as well, just to kind of see exactly how easy it was for somebody in Lance's situation to manipulate the entire sport by talking to the guy whose job it is to keep the sport clean.
Yeah, so there's a couple of those just more obscure things. Obscure if you're not a cycling fan, that probably were deemed not that appealing to the American public. Was kind of made for the non-cycling public. But those would be more interesting. That and how it came to be that the grand jury and again, I want to hedge this with saying I don't think Lance should have been sent to prison. I didn't have any say over that, and if I did, I would say that probably was a waste of taxpayer money to spend 2 years on it. But the only way to get any real story out of that would be for Lance to tell it, and he's not ready.
Because there was a sense, and it was clear that if you want to win the tour, if you think you're good enough to win the tour, there's the door. That's what he was talking. He could have been saying it about you, but obviously, I think in that instance, he was talking about Tyler Hamilton. And there's a sense that Tyler certainly feels that Lance got him popped as soon as he left. And I guess that's a warning to everybody in the peloton. You know, cross me and I will get you popped.
I mean, he said it to me, Lance. So Lance, I mean, I don't know if I was the first person or the only person to tell Tyler, but I was the one that told him that because, and I took it as Lance telling me as a threat because this was 2004 when he knew that I was looking to leave the team. He, after that Von 2 stage, he was complaining about, you know, Iban Mayo and Tyler, how fast they went. And he said, look, these guys took it too far. So, you know, I've talked to Verbruggen about it and they're going to take care of it. But it was meant to be an implicit threat to me. And yeah, that's what happened. I mean, there's no denying that that's the end result. It would be highly coincidental if after all that, you know, that just so happened to be the time that they got caught. I just, in my mind, that's how it happened. I mean, I guess there's some small off chance that it was coincidental, but I don't know, man. That's a stretch.
Okay, what is the impact of being on the other side of that conversation from your perspective then? When you're kind of getting to a stage of your career where legitimately you should be thinking about making enough money to protect your family forever, right? That's the whole point of getting to this and competing in sport. You do it for money and it's your job. And also you do it for love, fair enough. I get it. That's the start of it. But at this point, it's like,
money.
yeah, 100%. And like, does that make the rage simmer at that point, or do you become a kind of quiet assassin and go, I'm going to pick you up at some point in the future and I'm going to wait? What is the impact of seeing a threat so nakedly executed like that?
Well, I thought to myself, and I hadn't committed to leaving the team yet, and I had hoped that, I mean, part of me wanted to stay on the team because Lance, you know, he was going to win his 6th tour that year, and he did. And I just figured, look, this, you know, because once in a while he would even he understood the magnitude of the risk he was taking, right? No matter how much control you have, that there's physical evidence of this happening, and mistakes can happen, anything can happen, right? And you can be exposed. Like, that's a real thing. No matter how protected you are by politics, there's real risk involved in this. So I thought that after he won 6, he would be the happiest guy on earth to never fucking do it again. But he just doesn't know when to quit, right? So I was thinking, okay, well, after this tour, maybe it wouldn't, and I didn't expect them to necessarily just say, okay, Floyd, you're going to be the leader now, but that there would be a vacuum there, and a leader would be, you know, picked to go sort of follow that up if Lance was going to retire. And I mean, honestly, it never even crossed my mind that he would want to race again. But when I talked to him about it during that tour, while they were trying to get me to sign another contract, he wouldn't give me a direct answer about whether he was going to race again. And in my mind, I'm thinking, like, I don't, you know, 3 was enough. Like, I don't need to stay here and help you win again. I'd rather go. I mean, I was in great shape that year. I had a great tour, and I wanted to race, at least have an opportunity to race for myself. And he just wasn't willing to give me that. So, you know, I left, which in hindsight probably was the end of all of it. But yeah, and I can't remember what the point of the question was, but that's kind of how it went. I was going to say that, you know, that implicit threat about Tyler was always in the back of my mind, but I also knew that there was a kind of it was, his career was at that point very near the end, if it wasn't at the end. So sooner or later he was going to be gone, and I didn't think that he was foolish enough or would be foolish enough to try to manipulate things after he was gone. There would be no benefit to him to do that other than just, you know, sheer pettiness. I'm not suggesting that that's what happened to me, but I was in the context of, is this safe for me to go race elsewhere? I was pretty comfortable that wasn't going to be a risk for me. So I kind of moved on, but that's why I didn't stay, because he just wouldn't give me any clarity on whether he wanted to race again. And then he did. I mean, he went and won it a 7th time, which again, you know, he wants to attribute everything that happened to me and to having come back. But I think it would benefit him to look back and just look at some of the other things he did. Like, did you really need to win 7 and rub it in everyone's face? That was a bit much. I mean, even if it came down later, then there's less to say you're the greediest asshole on earth, right? He gave him every reason to hate him, every single one.
We need whistleblowers. And that's why your contribution to this story, I think, really can't be undersold. I did want to ask you, Floyd, how did you get caught? What? Given how brilliant U.S. Postal were for such a long period of time at managing things, what ultimately, how did you end up getting popped? What, in retrospect, what caused the testosterone ratio to go through the roof? Apart from taking testosterone, obviously.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, look, I followed the same formula that they did, and the testing hadn't really meaningfully changed in those 2 years. So I don't know.
Yeah. Were you doing blood bags in the middle of the tour? Because Tyler told us this story about the blood bags and the kind of blood dripping out and how dangerous that was. And because look, for people who are unfamiliar, you have a really bad day. I think stage 16, stage 17 is a really amazing day, and then that's the day that they test you for and pop you for that. Like, did you know that you were going to have that amazing day that day? Were the drugs that spectacular that you were like, yeah, I feel supercharged today?
No, I can see how it'd be easy to interpret everything, you know, with drugs being the major factor. But things happen in races anyway, where you have good and bad days, and that was just by coincidence. A lot of things happened there that allowed that to result in the way it went. I lost enough time that they had kind of written me off. Like, if I'd only lost 3 minutes, they never would have let me go in the first place. They could have kept me with the peloton. They didn't want to spend the chips that they wanted to save for the last climb on the first climb, so they had to make a decision. And had I not lost, 8 or 9 minutes, they would absolutely have kept me with them. It might have resulted in a group of 10 guys at the top of the first climb, but then the peloton would have come back together for the most part, and we would have ridden it out and just gone a little slower up the final climb, and that would have been the end. But because they just decided this guy's 9 minutes, we'll just kind of all gamble, and then they just waited too long and didn't get organized. It was more a result of just bad tactical decisions than it was of drugs. I mean, I put out 320 watts or whatever it was on average, which is a lot for that amount of time. But, an average cyclist can go out and do 315 watts. You don't need drugs for that. I could do it for longer. So that was more of a just misjudgment on their part. And one of probably my bigger strength as a cyclist was, lower output for longer periods of time. Like, I wasn't great with the crazy accelerations like Pantani was, or even Lance attacking like that. This was a strength of mine to begin with. So I wouldn't say that drugs played any meaningful role in the bad day or the good day. I mean, I did do blood transfusions, but they don't correspond or correlate to what happened there.
I was always interested in that. Like, can you put down, I'm going to have it today, and straight away the impact is that next day because the hematocrit level goes up, and I'm 10 Tigers, or is it actually it's kind of a slower burn?
Look, but I believe I did the blood transfusion, that second one that I did, the night before stage 15. So it doesn't really add up. It doesn't make sense to be the reason for going slow or the reason for going extraordinarily faster than that. So it doesn't. Yeah, I never could make sense of it. It's been a long time, frankly, since I looked at the actual dates, but I never could make sense of it relative to that, because that's a possibility, right? It can happen if it's not stored properly. And I never had this happen to me that I know of, or never had any dramatic, unhealthy effect. So I don't really know, but I have heard of people that, have done a blood transfusion that wasn't either stored properly or done properly or something, and have, been ill the next day. But that's not attributable here.
It's a real, my counter argument to the point you were making earlier on about just letting everybody do it is that, like, we don't know when they're going to be doing it. So we don't know how much of it will be down to, like, so for the next 3 days, Floyd's going to ride absolutely amazing. He's just had a blood bag, and the tactics are, I'd love to see a sport where we actually had a system that the riders believed in was doing its best to
absolutely
catch people.
Yep, I'm with you. I'd love to see it too. I guess I'm coming from more of a perspective of, until we have that, do we need to keep, destroying people? I guess that's the point. And just, to be clear, if you allowed EPO, you wouldn't need blood transfusions, because there is a limit to how fast you can go even with drugs, right? So you don't need to augment your blood levels with blood transfusions but for the fact that there's an EPO test. So then that limits how much EPO you can use. So now you got to figure out another solution. And then coincidentally, EPO ends up being a masking agent for the blood transfusion itself. But if you take that away, you eliminate the most risky thing that the athletes are currently doing, which is blood transfusions.
Floyd, it's a really tricky thing to ever question about how you get around all the problems you've highlighted here today, the problems we've been chatting about for the last few years. Do you honestly believe in the let everybody dope solution, or is there a better way in terms of the UCI and WADA and USADA looking at this?
I mean, I don't know what it is. If there's a better way, I'm more than happy to stand down on that statement, because I would prefer to have what was just suggested, which is a system that everyone believed was fair. And sure, people would try to cheat, and some might get away with it from time to time, but that's not what you have now. What you have now is it's just thoroughly, ridiculous situation where everyone knows that, at the very least, they know that if the other guys want to do it, they can probably get away with it, which leaves you with an impossible choice. So if there's a way to do that, if there's a way to create a situation where people have relative confidence that they, aren't competing against an entirely dope peloton, then I think everyone wants that. I mean, really, I don't think anybody enjoyed the risk part of it with the, blood transfusions and everything else. That was not pleasant. But my point of view is one of a practical matter, just to say, I haven't heard a solution that even sounds remotely workable otherwise. So what do we do?
And it's part of the fact that you don't see them workable because of the institutions that exist in cycling. Like, if I put this question to you, if money was no object and you were the dictator CEO of a new UCI, a breakaway organization, is there something you could do with all the money in the world and your own anti-doping agency and a brand new organization to give yourself confidence in clean sport in cycling?
Man, that's the thing. And I don't want it to come off as sounding like pointing fingers at them because they're failing and we should just allow it to happen because they're incapable of doing it because of ineptitude. It's because of a lot of factors. They are inept, but that's not why I'm saying this. It's because right now, given unlimited resources, you could probably do enough testing and you could probably spend enough money on actually creating new tests for new drugs and maybe keep up. Probably not. You'd still be a little bit behind and somebody would figure out a way around it. But right now it's not even close. I mean, even if you just look at WADA's spending on testing and research, it goes down every year while their budget goes up. It's bizarre. Because certainly the availability of new, more sophisticated drugs is not declining. So I'm not sure how you reconcile that with the fact that they just decided they don't need to do any more, research. So, I mean, I guess if you gave me the job and said, Floyd, you can't just allow it. You got to figure out how to make it as fair as possible. First of all, I'd probably say I don't want the job. But if I had to do it, I guess most of the resources would go into the science of testing and then trying to figure out a way. This is another huge hurdle, is trying to figure out a way to balance the amount of testing that would be required with just simple human freedom. Like, I don't know how you allow people to have any free time on their own or any meaningful amount of time alone or on their own where you'd be able to have confidence that they didn't do something. I just don't know how that would work. So I'm not saying that the UCI isn't doing it because they're incapable. I'm saying they're not doing it probably because, number one, they don't have the resources, and even if they did, it's probably simply not. I don't know. Is there another solution other than testing? I just don't know what it would be. You can't, like, a lie detector test isn't going to work. What would the solution be? I just don't know what it is.
You kind of answered my last question as well. It was going to be, do you see a role for yourself to be involved in the sport again at any kind of meaningful international competitive level? I guess that's not in your future, certainly, or part of your plans, is it?
No, not at all. I lived it, and it was I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It was that kind of thrill. Like, I'll never feel that again, right? That kind of risk, and just not the doping risk, but the risk of riding your bike and the chance of winning being small, but being young enough to still go for it. Like, that'll never happen again. And for me, that's what cycling was. And I'm not the kind of person that would really want to roll in a bureaucracy like that to begin with. So it's not for me, but I like it. And I hope they figure out how to, look, it's an awesome sport. It probably won't ever be, an obsession in America like it is in Europe, but it's having done it, and anyone that's felt that knows what I'm talking about.
Floyd, you've been great with your time. Thanks a million, man. Cheers. I hope all well with you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me on.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
I'm listening to the show every morning, and you can say it's grand. It's not grand if you're not on it, though.
OTB's Mount Rushmore.
Some talent in Cork, isn't there? Wow. A few of the GA boys weren't happy, but it was my sporting hero. I was contesting, I think, against Jimmy Barry Murphy. So once you're in that company, everything is good.
Join the debate across all our social channels at Off the Ball.
It's very, very special. Believe me, I think it becomes more special when you're on the couch, because if something unfortunately inside me that's ultra competitive, and I need to be there.
Catch the live decision-making over the next few months on OTB AM, live every weekday at 7:30 AM on OTB Sports Radio.
OTB AM. The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
All right, you're very welcome along to this week's episode of the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, brought to you in association with Now TV, where you can stream every episode of the unmissable new show Gangs of London on the Now TV Entertainment Pass, which also has a 14-day free trial that you can still avail of. And I'm delighted to say this week's guest is Ardal O'Hanlon. Ardal, how are you?
All right, I have to say. Yeah, grand. Thank you for asking. How are you?
This is one of those situations where people actually ask, how are you? And they kind of mean it. It's like, oh,
I know.
How are you?
Well, I'm grand. I mean, I can't say I'm loving it, the lockdown, but there are compensations, and we try and find the good.
How are you?
What part of the world are you in?
I'm in Dublin at the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're hanging out with Matt Damon, basically.
Yeah, me and Matt. Yeah, loving it. Where are you?
Also in Dublin. It's not the worst city to be locked down in, actually. Yeah, we discovered there were loads of little green spaces that we didn't even know existed within the 2K radius.
I pretty much know every house in Dublin now. I have pissed on every lamppost. It's good though. I like it. There's 5 of us in the house, so I've got 3 pretty grown-up kids, and we're getting on okay. Like, there are flashpoints, obviously, but we're getting on grand, I think, as things go. But my daughter, who's 20, announced the other day that, and she just said at the table, like, no offense, but I'm never having dinner with you again when this is all over. But I've enjoyed. I mean, I kind of enjoyed it. I mean, I'm a worrier by nature, and I am a little bit worried about the future. But I was always a worrier. You know what I mean? I always imagined the worst was going to happen, and it kind of has, and it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So it's fine.
And in a weird way, you were proven right to be a worrier, and so it's kind of it's payback for all those years.
It's a validation. It's I've been absolutely validated. The other thing, of course, is as well, because of the business I'm in, stand-up comedy and acting, being an actor and stuff like that, you're kind of used to long fallow periods, where you don't actually leave the house very often. So again, it's all something I'm very familiar with, this hanging about and watching endless hours of TV and reading and musing and writing and doodling and walking and, doing the things that I actually enjoy doing. You know what I mean? Like, work is always something you kind of have to do, even though I quite enjoy my work. But, I am treasuring these moments with the family. Luckily, they're all pretty healthy, which is the most important thing. And, you just find the compensations, don't you?
Is the writing and or doodling turning into something that you could align with your career? Is there an end in sight to anything you're writing at the moment?
Well, I don't know is the honest answer. I've been working pretty solidly up to March the 8th. I finished a tour, like a fairly extensive tour on March the 8th. So I was kind of, really looking forward to a good long break. Not quite this long a break, but I was sort of, I was at that time in the year, like where you kind of press the reset button and you think about what's next and all that kind of thing. So, and this is what I like. This is what most actors, I think, and stand-up comedians do a lot of the time, is you spend an awful lot of time just like arsing around. This is where you get your material. When you're not obviously working is when you're actually working the hardest. And it's when you're getting the most out of it. Do you know what I mean? So I'm working on I'm always doodling with stand-up and stuff, but I'm working on a novel that I've been working on for years. So it's actually, something that was on the long finger and now I've got back to it. So, that's a good thing.
It's interesting. Like, what are we now? Is it over 20 years since the first book, which obviously was a huge success, Ardal? Was it immediately a thing after that happened that this almost became a glint in your eye almost, that you were like, I have to follow this up with another thing? Because I presume the process of how well received the first novel was something that encouraged you to go back and do it again.
Yeah, and you know what? I did try and do it again over the years and I didn't get anywhere. And I wasted an awful lot of time not really having a good idea. But this was something that I'd actually started about 4 or 5 years ago. I had a draft of a novel and, like a lot of things, you get distracted and, I'm kind of lucky that I have other irons in the fire. I love stand-up and I love traveling around the place and you get acting jobs and that's always great. So things like novels, which are really, really hard in comparison, you kind of tend to put in the long finger. So this is an absolutely golden opportunity, which I am grasping, with both hands to make good use of the time. But I have to say, like, I'm talking a couple of hours a day at most. Yeah. There's other important things to do as well, like watch TV and stuff.
Absolutely. Could I just ask, Ardal, about the second book that didn't actually make it to the shelf in the end? What actually happened with that project?
Well, I mean, I start and stop a lot of things. Right. That was a novel that I think it was, the first novel was a real, it was a real labor of love. It was something that was bubbling away for years, like long before I ever strayed into comedy and acting. Like, I wanted to be a writer. That was from a very early age, actually. Like, I would say from the age of 12, that's all I wanted to do. And I was always writing. And I thought I'd sort of grow out of stand-up and I'd become a proper writer. But so the first novel came out in a sort of a splurge, and then because the novel was reasonably successful at the time, people sort of saying, well, have you got another one? And then you get seduced by that and you think, okay, I know what I'm doing here, but of course you never really know what you're doing. And I started a novel, one that I wasn't absolutely passionate about the idea, and I was still very much enjoying the other dimensions to my career. So I kept leaving it for long periods and then coming back to it. And by the time I'd come back to it, I'd have sort of forgotten what it was about or what I was trying to achieve. And the tone would change as well a lot. And so it became a mess. And it was a mess that I couldn't untangle. And eventually I dumped it. And, while I was sort of disappointed about all the time I'd wasted on it over the previous few years, ultimately that's a really liberating thing to do. It's to just dump something that isn't working. Even though there were probably, line by line, you could say that's pretty good, but it just didn't cohere into anything meaningful. Or it did, it just wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, which is to express your whatever kind of thought or whatever kind of thing you're trying to express. So I abandoned that. And then I always wanted to write again. And eventually, about 4 or 5 years ago, I sort of set aside 6 months or whatever just to try and get something going. And I got really into this novel that I'm currently working on, and I really loved it. And but I didn't show it to anyone, or I didn't even tell anyone. You're the first people to know, frankly. And so I'm just getting back to that now. But you know what? I don't work with any great hope or expectation. If this never saw the light of day, I think it wouldn't be it would still be a worthwhile exercise. Do you know what I mean?
That's amazing that it's such a liberating thing. I would expect to be able to do that and to not actually worry too much about the end product, that the process itself is so enjoyable, and to not have that stubbornness. Ultimately, that has to be the reason to do something, I think. It has to be something that
like, yes, of course you'd like it to get loads of attention and you'd like to earn lots of money on the back of it. But I mean, the whole reason for doing comedy or for doing anything you love, like what you guys do, you know, what something that you absolutely love, it's something that you'd almost do for free. Not quite, but you would, you know. Like when I started doing stand-up, I didn't think I'd be playing to big crowds. You know, I thought I'd be in the international bar in Dublin for the rest of my life, you know, playing to 20 people. And you know what? The satisfaction from doing something like that is exactly the same as the satisfaction you can get from playing to big crowds in nice theatres. Almost.
When you say you're a worrier, then does that actually factor into playing in front of 20 people in the international? Do you worry that perhaps you wouldn't get up to the next level, or was it actually just so enjoyable at the time that you didn't worry about that particular facet of your life?
Yeah, no, I didn't worry. Once you were doing something kind of like reasonably constructive, that's great mitigation for everything else. You know what I mean? Like if you didn't have that release, even if it was only once a week or once a month or a couple of times a month, you know, that was enough to keep you going. You know what I mean? Where you kind of felt that you were doing something vaguely useful, you know, and not just useful for yourself, but useful for other people. Other people quite, you know, get something out of it as well, like the audience.
Is it more difficult to write jokes than a chapter of a novel? How do you compare and contrast these?
It depends on what hat you're wearing at the time. I think during lockdown, I'm finding it really hard to write jokes. When it all started, you know, like with the whole sort of surreal element to it, and there was kind of a, as well as the fear factor, there was a kind of a giddiness I felt, and you know, you were noticing all this new etiquette, which was, you know, which on the surface is a real seam, you know, for comedians, but that quickly becomes really boring. You know what I mean? And also the shelf life of that is so short. Like the next time I'm going to do a gig, like let's say for the sake of argument, it might be October. You know, anything that I came up with in the last month or 2 months is no one's going to want to hear that now. You know what I mean? So we're all trying to guess what, you know, second guess what an audience will want, or what, you know, what you want to talk about in 6 months' time or a year's time. But I feel that this period we want to just put it behind us as quickly as possible. So I did find it hard. So I kind of started off writing jokes because I'd just come off the back of a tour. So I was in good form, you know, and the tour went really well and everything. And, you know, I had another few shows lined up and stuff, one-offs and festivals and things. So, you know, I wasn't going to just stop writing and performing, you know. So you know, I was going to carry that on, but very quickly I just, you know, it just didn't seem right either, you know. So I found that the you know, writing the novel where you sit down for 3 or 4 hours a day, I found that structure really important, you know, because like panic, I'll be honest with you, panic did set in for a little while, you know, obviously the health thing and your family's welfare being the main thing, but you know, I was also thinking like, oh my God, you know, like what I do, like there's just, you know, that stops completely for the foreseeable future. So after a month or two of like, you know, enjoying what lockdown had to offer, I did sort of, you know, about a month ago, sat down and started, I need structure to my day. I need to get up. I need to have a reason to get up, and I need to spend 3 or 4 hours a day. And then I can do whatever else needs to be done around the place.
That makes sense. You're also a big football fan. So that hasn't been there, that rhythm hasn't been there in your life.
Yeah, well, I'm playing football tennis out the back with my son, who's 18. He's just gone 18. One of those unfortunate Leaving Cert students who's got lots of time on his hands now. And so we set up, we got a garden bench to use as a kind of a net. And we play football tennis in our tiny little garden. So it's actually really good for the ball skills. So the ball can only bounce on your side once, and you can only take 2 touches. So it's pretty decent. But I haven't really missed live sport on TV as much as I thought I would.
It's funny, isn't it? I think a lot of people feel that way.
Yeah, because, you know, that brought its own anxieties too. Watching Leeds on a Saturday afternoon at 12:30, you know, like that could you know, affect your health in a very negative way. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, like I'd be gutted if Leeds didn't get their just rewards at the end of all of this. I don't really worry about anything else too much in that regard. I miss the Six Nations as well a lot. I mean, because that's just an institution at this time of the year, you know, and I just felt that, you know, yeah, that was another. I mean, it's those two things. It was Leeds and Ireland.
Do you love Marcelo Bielsa? Are you like a full-on Bielsa fan?
Absolute devotee, yeah. A fully signed-up member of the cult of Bielsa. Yeah, I love him. I love everything about him. I think he's an extraordinary man. I love football people who have, you know, kind of maverick philosophies, but also like interests beyond football. I know he's a football obsessive, but like he's a cultured man, you know, and he's you know, just everything I've read about him, I just enjoy him. And he's got this ridiculous streak of honesty and, you know, kind of a purist approach to football, and I just love him.
I was only hearing about the family the other day. Apparently his brother and sister are also high achievers. At one stage, one of them was imprisoned by the leaders of the junta, and his sister was like a Supreme Court judge or something.
Yeah. I know. It's just, yeah, he's just a really interesting character. And then, you know, for someone like that who comes from that sort of background, and then when you read about him when he applied for the job at Leeds, and they were saying, like, what can you bring to the party? And he was able to produce dossiers on every single formation that Burton Albion had used the previous year in every game. So it's that kind of obsessive attention to detail that you have to admire.
Yeah, we could do.
He's also playing great football. I mean, the football that Leeds played during the year was a sensation for the last 2 years. It's been absolutely incredible, as good as anything else I've seen in recent years.
Well, Ardal, you're here to induct something into our OTB Culture Hall of Fame. We've had a great variety of things that have gone in already. Rocky 3 from Andy Lee. The singer Dermot Kennedy put Gladiator in. The US Office, we had Stephanie Preisner on putting that in. Louisa Harland from Derry Girls put in Gomorrah. Paul Howard put in Columbo, which... yeah.
Big fan of Columbo.
Gavin James on last week, he was putting in Back to the Future. You want to put in Deadwood, which I love. Yeah. Tell us about this.
Well, Deadwood is one of those great HBO series. It came out sort of just around the time Sopranos was already out, and then The Wire came out, and then Deadwood was sort of the third one, and they're often talked about in the same breath. It's set in the Old West in this town called Deadwood, which is actually a real place. And it's just a rollicking, great story set in the Old West, but it's so much more than that. I mean, it is really funny. It is really entertaining. The characters are brilliant. The sets are incredible, but it's the ambition of it that I love. I mean, it's you know, on the surface, like it's about the Old West, and it's about this gold mining town where you have all these renegade characters. But after a few episodes, it begins to dawn on you that it's actually about so much more than that. It's about civilization itself. And you literally watch this town, this little, you know, like gold mining settlement. You watch it being built sort of brick by brick over the course of the 3 series that were made into like you know, a functioning town where people, you know, learn that they have to actually live with each other. So all these outlaws and villains, and they're the most dastardly villains in TV history. I mean, they're just brilliantly drawn characters. Ian McShane plays this saloon owner, the most corrupt, venal man, you know, you could imagine. And then there's this kind of upright sheriff played by Timothy Oliphant called Seth Bullock, who comes to town. So it's really kind of about them and their shifting relationship over the 3 series. But through their relationship, you see that how, you know, all elements of a town and a society and a civilization kind of utterly depend on each other. We're seeing it now. Like, people are realizing that we're very dependent on others now, if they didn't realize it beforehand. And so that's how important the show it is. I mean, it's as big as that. It is about civilization. It's about America. It's about the building of America. It's about civilization. You see over the 3 episodes, like the education, a school marm comes to town, newspapers come to town. You know, you see, you know, law and order being imposed gradually. It's just fascinating.
It's got everything. It's got the arrival of the telegram. It's got immigration. It's got disease. It's got Clean water is an issue. It's got religion. It's wild as well. It's totally wild. Violence in it is choreographed and shocking, and also quite amusing sometimes.
Yeah, but it never forgets like to be incredibly entertaining. Like the and the other thing that is so impressive about it is the language. It's like, and I think it's the thing that I like most about it, is that it's the creator of the show, David Milch, who's a legendary character. He kind of invented a language for it. So it's this, people would call it Shakespearean. Not everyone will, it's an old cliche, obviously, to call something brilliant Shakespearean. But it is actually kind of based on that era Elizabethan sort of language. But it's really filthy and profane. Like, it's the insults in it are second to none. It's kind of biblical as well, a lot of biblical references. So, he is using the Bible and Shakespeare as starting points for this invented language that is supposed to kind of represent the language of that period. And everything about it is really authentic. Like, apparently even the costumes they wear are absolutely down to the last stitch, like what people would be wearing. They built the town in an exact replica of the town. But it's the language, really, I suppose. Ultimately, it's the dialogue. Like, it's just, the guy's a brilliant writer. He's not just a brilliant TV writer. Like, he's just a brilliant writer. If he was writing novels, we'd be talking about his novels.
It's interesting that it had such an abrupt ending for such a well-renowned show that's so highly rated. Essentially, it was a dispute between HBO and Paramount. As you say, everything's down to the last stitch in the outfits and things like that. It was such an expensive show to make, so it never got to season 4. Did you see the movie that was made to kind of tie things up?
I just watched the movie the other night in advance of this chat, actually, because I hadn't seen it before. I kind of didn't really... I wasn't that pushed about seeing the movie, funny enough, because I had this memory of it, of the show, which I saw, I don't know, many years ago, 10 years ago, I suppose. And I haven't seen the show since either. So I actually don't fully know what I'm talking about this morning. But I did see the movie the other night and I enjoyed it, but it was, as I kind of expected, it was a bit flat and a bit of an anticlimax. But it's still brilliant and still better than most things out there. And it was just great to see the characters all together again. Because the characters are brilliant, and some of them are based on real life characters like Wild Bill Hickok and Wyatt Earp turns up at one point, and Seth Bullock, the sheriff in it, was a real character as well. But apparently Milch, the writer, so when he went to the network with it first, his idea was to do something based on ancient Rome, but they had just had their Rome thing. They had a project about ancient Rome. At the meeting, they said, "Oh, well, like that's a really good idea, but have you got anything else?" And it just in a split second, he was able to say, "Oh, it could be set in the Old West just as easily." So, originally it was supposed to be about ancient Rome, which might be a more obvious starting point for writing a TV show about civilization.
But that's remarkable, Ardal, that it does have that exact same impact, or the desired effect, at least, writing in a completely different time. And like, I was going to ask this, you, given the fact that it is so far removed from our reality when you compare it to The Wire and The Sopranos, is Deadwood actually a bigger television achievement?
I think it is. I mean, well, The Sopranos, I know this is sacrilege, but I can take or leave The Sopranos. The Wire I absolutely loved, and I think The Wire you can speak about in the same breath as Deadwood because it's equally ambitious. It is trying to do sort of almost the same thing in Baltimore. It digs really deep into the institutions that kind of keep society just about together, and we see how fragile it is. You watch it with the killing of George Floyd and the fallout from that. It's also fragile, and that's what these guys are writing about. David Milch and David Simon in the case of The Wire. And they're seeing how the different levels of society overlap with each other, and how the structures of society, like the institutions that the church, education, even theatre turns up in Deadwood at one point. All the things that we kind of need, and I think over the last few months we're realizing what we actually need, what we don't need, and what we're missing. And a lot of people are talking. Sorry, I'm straying off the point here a bit, but Sorry, go back to your point.
No, I absolutely continue on your tangent all along. I was just trying to compare it to the other two in terms of a television achievement. But I think what you actually said is way more interesting than my question about what this actually tells us about.
Well, it's just in terms of scope, like in terms of what people, you know, like it just blows me away. You know, like those achievements, like, and I would single out The Wire and Deadwood, like they're as good as anything ever created in the arts, as any great painting, great novel. You know, those guys would have been the Dickens of our time. You know, people who chronicle the malaises of our age and everything. You know, these are the people who are doing it. It's David Milch, David Simon, incredible stuff.
The one problem you have with Deadwood when you start it is that you know it's coming to an end too early, and so the movie's grand. It's like it's a nice kind of way. You're dead right. It's a nice way to see these characters again, but it's only grand compared to just how intimate and detailed it seems every scene is in the 3 seasons. And it's so disappointing that there wasn't a 4th season and a 5th season in retrospect.
Yeah.
Where we could have just lived out exactly what was supposed to happen.
Yeah. You would love. Yeah, I would love to have seen it through to its bitter end, but you know, we have to, you know, take what was given to us in a way, you know. And I don't know. I mean, reading interviews with Milch as well over the years, like, he's an amazing character. He kind of, you know, he's kind of philosophical about it. Like, you know, civilization is an ongoing project, the building of civilization. So we don't quite know how it's going to pan out ourselves. You know, we don't know what sort of a world we're going to be living in 6 or 8 months' time, you know, realistically. And I didn't mind so much that the series was kind of open-ended. Like life is not neatly packed, you know, it's not, it can't be neatly packaged, or there's no closure really for most people and for most societies. You know, no one can really predict what's going to happen. So, you know, I'm fine with the way it worked out. It was 3 great series. I enjoyed every minute of it. I was riveted to it. I wish I could remember it better, and I wish I could quote from it. But it's definitely, and I think it's with a lot of things for me. I don't know if you find this as well when you watch stuff. Like, I'm rubbish at remembering lines from songs or poems or novels or anything. I can't even remember the character's name sometimes. But you kind of feel you've absorbed something, and it informs you in ways that you don't even know for the rest of your life. So. Yeah. Sometimes I feel I'm speaking like a character from Deadwood. Sometimes, you know, I get all biblical and profane, you know. So I don't know. And I even notice it in some of the stuff I write sometimes, like I kind of, you know, you build clause upon clause and, you know, kind of really push something, you know, and that's what they did a lot in the writing in Deadwood. They just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And you think that the thought is over, the sentence is over, and then it's just an extra layer, and then an extra layer, an extra layer, and then a punchline. You know, it's unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, it's class. It is absolutely class, and I would totally recommend everybody getting on Now TV and checking it out, because it is actually, now that we're talking about it, I think it's the type of thing that I could happily go back and rewatch. It's interesting though that we're talking about TV series that were made in The Wire and in Deadwood 20 years ago, essentially at this stage. Do you feel stuff has layered on and built on that and used them as starting points in a vernacular, or we all accept that this is how TV works, or that this is a high watermark and things haven't quite reached up to it just yet?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question, and you know, personally, I suppose I think it's a high watermark. I thought, you know, around that time, Sopranos, The Wire, Deadwood, maybe Mad Men, a few things like that, you know, certainly set the bar very high for television. And in a way that, like, sort of the great filmmakers of the 70s, people like Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola and people like that kind of, you know, brought cinema to a place where it hasn't really got back to, I think. But then that could be a kind of a function of my age and everything else. And, you know, you're probably biased towards a certain period in your own life. But I think there's brilliant stuff on TV. Like, I think there's an awful lot of, I think the new model of TV, you know, let's say the Netflix model, is slightly different than the HBO model of that period, in the sense that there is a bit of a churn going on. So they're churning out stuff. I find with most things nowadays, that, like, let's say something is 12 episodes long. Most of them could be done in 6 or 7 episodes. You know, you usually love the first, like, take something like The Sinner, a really good series. Two series of The Sinner so far. I think there's another one coming out quite soon. I really like it. First 2 episodes of each series are brilliant, and you're hooked. The next 3 episodes are kind of meandering. They're treading water. And then, you know, there might be 1 or 2 other good episodes. And then they kind of jump the shark. Everything jumps the shark eventually. And it just becomes a little bit too ludicrous. And even though you still stick with it and it's still brilliant and you love the characters and, you know, but ultimately everything just goes too far. But there are exceptions. Better Call Saul. Brilliant. The last series, as good as anything. I loved that show called Unorthodox. Did you see that?
I haven't seen it, no.
Set in the Hasidic Jewish community in Brooklyn. And because it's a world that I wasn't familiar with, I knew nothing about. And that's what television can do really well. It introduces to a whole new world that you never knew anything about. And it's done really well. And so things like that, I do enjoy. And that was only 4 episodes. That was kind of like, did a bit of cop on there. You know, they weren't flogging it.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Is this the type of TV you want to get involved in into the future? Is that like, I mean, you know, stupid question. Would you like to be in The Wire? Of course. But like, how do you even go about something like
Ger, would I like to be in anything? Yeah. At this stage, I'll take anything. Yeah, I would actually. I mean, I of course I would. I'd love to be. You know, I've had I can't complain about the roles I have had. You know, but I do feel that I haven't really got into that kind of area, and for whatever, maybe it's because, you know, people still see me as, you know, kind of a version of other characters I've done in the past or whatever. But yeah, no, of course, you know, you'd always be open to doing challenging stuff.
And what about TV writing? Because like you were talking about Milch as a novelist, and it feels like David Simon wrote 5 different novels. Well, David Simon and a team of writers, obviously, for the 5 seasons of The Wire. Again, 5th one cut short. It does feel like they're novelistic, and here you are talking about writing your 2nd novel. Would you think about writing a TV series like that and trying to be a showrunner?
No, it'd be. It's not that I haven't thought about it in the past, or haven't thought about writing stuff for TV, or haven't tried to write stuff for TV. I just haven't had much success with it. It's not something I'm confident about, actually. You know, so I don't think I have the discipline. Again, when you read interviews with people like Milch or Simon, you know, or you hear them speak, these guys are, I mean, they're up there, like, with, you know, their knowledge, their commitment, you know, all those things. I don't have that. You know, I'm a dilettante. I dip in and out of stuff. You know, I work hard when I have a job or when I have a project that I'm interested in, but, you know, I don't have that all-consuming, you know, absolute need to sort of do that. You know, I would rate those people up there with, like, people like Samuel Beckett and James Joyce. You know, that's how important they are, and that, you know, so it's yeah, no, I'm sort of in awe of them a bit.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the word confidence there. Is that a deliberately chosen word where you would self-analyze and almost check your own confidence, or your confidence does get checked a little bit when you consider those big projects?
Yeah, you know, like every day of my life when I get up, I'd have huge doubts as to what's the best way to start the day. You know, I don't know, comedy kind of suited me, you know, because it was sort of bitty, and you could sort of not so much hide behind it, because it's a very important, you know, it's a really good medium. It's a very well developed medium now. I think people know what to expect, you know, from a comedian, and what a comedian sort of, you know, the standards you have to sort of aim for. But it's you know, you kind of, with comedy, you kind of boil everything down to its essence, like, you know, like to one-liners. In the course of a show, you could have 50 different themes. You know, you can move very quickly from one theme to another, one gag to another, you know, from one frivolous thought to sort of a slightly more profound thought. You know, you can and you can have a lot of fun with it, and it's very lively and it's very loose. Whereas things like novels, or things like, you know, a series, TV series. Like that's just huge. It's a huge canvas to work on. You need tremendous concentration and attention to detail. So I think, you know, stand-up has kind of suited me better over the years as a medium, you know, to work it.
Just one final one for me then, on that point of confidence then, because we've got so many sports people on the show who talk about losing their confidence and finding it and how important that is. Is that a thing you go through at all, whether it's from stand-up or writing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is like, I just don't understand people who don't have self-doubt. I mean, it's a massive thing for me. It's you know, it's literally every day I question why I'm doing it. Probably too much to my own detriment, you know, just always questioning it and, you know, worrying about it. I definitely overcame sort of confidence issues in terms of performing a number of years ago. I would say about 10 years ago, actually. Like, I was one of the worst, you know, I was a nervous wreck before performing. And you might notice it if you were watching me in the audience, but beforehand, I would be in a terrible state. And, but, you know, definitely something changed over the years. And I realized that, you know, I finally convinced myself that it wasn't worth worrying about. Like what's the worst that can happen? You know, it's and I don't quite know how I overcame that. But I think it is age. I think it's experience. I think it's a number of things. I think it's, you know, I realized that being very, very well prepared is a great way to have the confidence, actually. I'm sure sports people would echo that as well. You know, if it's drilled into you what you have to do, and if you're fit and everything else, you know, you're not going to make as many mistakes. I love tennis. Is my sport at the moment, by the way. You know, I don't watch it so much on TV, but I play it a lot. And you know, I read a lot of stuff like the Agassi book and things like that. And there's a lovely little book called The Little Zen of Tennis as well. You know, about kind of losing your ego as well is very important, and always trying to kind of sublimate the ego, trying to just push it to one side and don't overthink things. And I think that really helps a lot when you're performing. Is, you know, don't, like, I don't know, you almost have to find something else inside you, like where it's not you there in front of the audience. Do you know what I mean? It's
because all of a sudden you're less potentially embarrassed about something going wrong, or
you're less exposed or something. If you just, you know, find your inner, you know, your alter ego, your more brash alter ego, let that come to the fore and sort of hide behind that.
How long did that take? And did somebody help you? Like, did the Zen of Tennis, was that kind of a penny drop moment, or is that just...
things like that helped me. Yeah, you know, I mean, I was never one for like for asking for help or anything like that, or for, you know, using you know, therapy or anything like that. Look, I'm lucky that I have a good relationship at home and with my wife and stuff like that. You know, we would talk about stuff a lot, and I think that's really important. You know, comedians and actors, you know, while they're raving egomaniacs, there's also a real camaraderie there as well. So people do talk about things, you know, about these kind of issues as well, usually in a jocular way and stuff. But no, I mean, you know, I think all the answers yourself, you know, and you know from your basic kind of awareness of what's going on in the world, your reading, you know, you kind of know what you need to do, and you know what's holding you back, and you know what's the kind of self-destructive tendencies. You kind of know everything you need to know. Sometimes people need to point you in the right direction.
And that I think is kind of the thing that was always the parallel for me between performers like you and sports people, was that so frequently you just need to get out of your own way, do all the preparation, make sure you've done it. But like, The Inner Game of Tennis is a book that has come up in discussion a good bit recently.
Oh, really?
Pete Carroll and Steve Kerr were talking about it, and it was a professional tennis coach who wrote this book because he got a bit bored teaching people, and it sold 2 million copies. And it's essentially like about listening to your inner voice and not letting that inner voice crush you in key moments. So you listen to your inner voice for practice and stuff, and then you say, okay, thanks very much, I've had enough of that now, and away you go. And you just kind of enter that flow state people talk about.
Yeah, but the other thing is, I don't remember a huge deal about the book, like everything else, unfortunately. But one thing that did stick with me is you always have to immediately forget about your last shot. Like I know I'm a very casual tennis player, but I play a lot because I love it, and I love being out there. And the last few weeks, I mean, God, since tennis was lifted, since the restrictions of playing tennis were lifted, the whole lockdown thing is so much more bearable. It's just amazing being out there, and it is that thing about, you just immediately have to forget the last shot, forget the last game, forget everything else, and absolutely be in the moment. And that's what it's all about. And, and that's a great habit. It's exactly the same on stage. If something doesn't go well, if you stumble over a gag or if there's a little bit of a lull, you just have to just forget about it. Absolutely forget about it. Move on to the next thing and believe that the next shot is going to be better. The next good joke is going to be better.
Well, look, that's a brilliant point to end this on. Ardal, you've been great with your time, and we're 100% going to put Deadwood into the OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brilliant.
Thanks a million for joining us.
Thank you very much indeed. Cheers.
It's Ardal O'Hanlon there, putting Deadwood into the OTB Culture Hall of Fame, which is now available to watch on Now TV. By the way, you can stream shows and movies worth staying in for on Now TV. Stream Pixar greats like Inside Out and Toy Story 4. We'll see you next week.
The OTB Culture Hall of Fame.
Brought to you by Now TV. Watch whatever you're in the mood for.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio. Off the ball.